Apollinaire is a tranquil place and a great empire that, for the first time in history, united a vast continent. From time immemorial, the symbol personifying this country has been a bird. Every Apollinaire history textbook began with a myth about how the empire began. It said that in the distant past, a goddess descended to Earth. After that, the chosen people were given the ability to transform into birds. Also, the people of the Apollinaire Empire believed that they were descended from birds. Even in the 5 elders of the ducal families, a certain bird was chosen as the family crest. All the people love birds and consider them sacred, so everything was just wonderful. On the one hand, this is why they trusted the birds, but in fact, there was another reason. It was believed that on the day when the divine bird of silver and gold descended on this land, the empire would finally gain eternal glory. There were different interpretations of this legend. Some thought that the emperor's child must have been born in the form of a bird. Others suspected that the emperor himself was gradually turning into a bird. Lost in their own conjectures, people in their own way waited for the condescension of faith on earth. And so, hundreds of years later, one peaceful day, the young emperor Richard Apollinaire came to his feathered friend, Durakan. Entering his room, something immediately seemed suspicious to Richard, and suddenly he saw an egg in a bird's cage. Thinking that the egg belonged to Durakan, he left the bird completely perplexed and confused. The hero himself understood that this could not be, because this bird was a male. Thinking that Durahan had met a female somewhere, the emperor looked at him doomedly, considering him a traitor. After all, even this bird has a mate, and is Richard the only one left alone? As a knight on the battlefield, he became famous as a famous hero of the empire. However, against all odds, even 2 years after his coronation, he continued to suffer from relationship problems. The aristocrats believed that this issue could no longer be postponed, and His Majesty needed to find the Empress urgently. In fact, it wasn't that Richard didn't want to date a potential monarch, but the point was different. Just cautious in words and deeds, a society lady, brought up according to the parameters set for the Empress, did not interest him. Since it was for life, Richard wanted to meet a girl he would really like here. However, the fabulous love story turned out to be a difficult test even for the Emperor. At that time, he could not even imagine that one small bird, not proud but not deprived of dignity, would be able to impress him so much. A few years ago, there was a lively festival in the empire and a festive atmosphere reigned everywhere. At this time, one man and one girl accidentally met on the street of the city. This relationship began with a spring breeze and a light dance. This is how the former emperor and empress met, who lived a long and happy life together. And the fruit of their beautiful and eternal love was the current Emperor Richard. Looking with admiration at his loving parents, he dreamed of the same future. It was as natural as breathing, and the hero believed that one day he would certainly meet his fate. And even now, after so much time, this dream was alive and hovered in his heart. If the knights who fought on the battlefield knew about this, they would be dumbfounded. Such a cold-blooded person, on whose face you can't see a smile, dreams of pure love, which even teenagers do not dream of. And is it possible that the feelings that Richard so carefully kept for his family have come to an end? He was an emperor who even controlled demons and was responsible for protecting the people. However, the craving for true love almost finished him, because with each new day this dream seemed less and less realizable. Turning back to his bird and looking at the egg in his cage, Richard wondered again where it could have come from. The strange thing was that Durahan was a special kind of eagle, but the egg was not even close to an eagle. Deciding that it was not the time and he was late, the hero left the room, not noticing a quiet rustle in the cage. In the evening of the same day, Richard returned to the office again, and sitting down at the table, he heard a knock on the door. It turned out to be the valet, Count Crusoe, who had brought evening tea for His Majesty. As the Emperor had no appointments scheduled for the next day, the Earl hoped that Richard would have a good rest. Looking carefully at the valet, the hero was pleased to hear this after a while. Looking at the young monarch in surprise, Crusoe decided to clarify whether something was bothering him. These words sounded like a shot that pierced the Emperor's head and touched him to the core. Glancing angrily at the Earl, Richard decided to remind him that someone was watching him, forcing him to find the Empress. Defiantly coughing, Crusoe decided to be honest and considered that even for the Emperor, the hero had too high requirements. The words were harsh, but the harsh truth pricked his eyes, and if the servant had nothing more to say, Richard wanted to end the conversation. About to leave immediately, Crusoe suddenly noticed an open window. He decided to close it before leaving, as it was dark outside and the air was very cold. Looking at the night sky, the valet dreamed that His Majesty would quickly change his interest from birds to women. Suddenly he saw an egg in a cage and wondered where it came from. Upon hearing that Durahan should be asked about this, Crusoe was surprised to know that the Emperor's feathered friend was a male. Closing the window and bowing goodbye to His Highness, the Count began to retire from the room. At that moment, Richard suddenly stopped him, noticing that the egg was moving. Thinking that this was impossible, Crusoe decided to chalk it up to a light gust of wind. But in the opinion of the Emperor, this version would have taken place if the valet had not closed the window. Looking at the egg suspiciously, both characters simultaneously came to the conclusion that they must be ghosts. 200 years before the unknown egg fell to earth, Heliana, the goddess of the beginning, decided that it was time to prepare to fulfill her promise. She intended to choose the most beautiful angel and send him to the human world. Over the next 200 years, her students had to show who was the best and find out about the demons in the human world in order to stop them. All the disciples of the goddess were skillful and beautiful birds who could turn into humanoid angels. However, the mysterious Haniel, nicknamed the Hybrid, was very different from everyone else, having silver hair and turning into a small bird. The other birds looked at her with mockery, and the eagle didn't understand how she dared to be among them at all. Swan was surprised that Haniel really believed that she could be chosen. However, the small but proud bird had been practicing hard for 200 years, without losing hope. At all costs, she wanted to defeat these arrogant guys and go to the human world. Other birds have been studying the laws of the human world for 200 years. Unlike them, however, Haniel worked to fight back against demons. Heliana was convinced that they would be able to uncover the plans of the demons, and therefore, the heroine wanted to protect the human world. And for this, it was necessary to learn how to resist the spawn of the abyss. The power of demons was in magic, and there were only 2 ways to win a battle against them. Since angels were forbidden to use magic in the human world, the first way was their divine power, but it is different for everyone. For example, eagles had a very strong attack, and swans had healing divine powers. As for Haniel, she had very weak attack power, which was compensated by a high divine defense. The second way to defeat demons was through the power of weapons, so the heroine became a celestial martial artist. Her mentor was a centaur, who was a fighter straight from the heavenly realm. For 200 years they trained together, not sparing themselves. As a result, on the day of graduation, the centaur decided that Haniel was worthy of receiving a staff made of sky oak wood. He was a little surprised that the heroine decided to do only martial arts, while other angels went into science and human culture. However, seeing the girl's mood, he was calm. Besides, she was the only bird with such beautiful silver hair. Realizing that if she managed to get into the human world, she would soon see her teacher, Haniel sincerely thanked him for everything. Of course, she dreamed of becoming the best student, but she also wanted to be at the selection ceremony, paired with a handsome man. However, she was alone, because everyone liked large and beautiful birds. Gathering her courage, the heroine decided to prove that her silver hair was not an ominous omen. In the end, when all the students gathered, Heliana decided that it was Haniel who would descend into the human world. After the incredible work experienced for the sake of this moment, the heroine could hardly believe that she really succeeded. However, according to the goddess, among all her disciples, it was Haniel who had the most beautiful soul. Therefore, looking at the heroine with a smile, Heliana believed that she would certainly succeed. The other birds were shocked, perplexed, and envious at the small bird that had overtaken everyone. Haniel decided that they all knew the basics, but were not yet up to the mark, and wished them good luck in heaven. Thus, the heroine went to the world of people, arriving there in the form of an egg, finding herself in a nest located in the hollow of a tree. One day, the animals from the forest trembled in fear in front of the proudly flying Durakan. Flying to the hollow of one of the trees, he pulled out a Haniel egg and carried it to the emperor's palace. Arriving at the place, he carefully put the find in his cage, placing a soft pillow under it. Hearing human voices outside, the heroine was horrified, thinking that how could people take up the nest? She knew that she had to hatch within a month, or else the magical powers would come to an end, but now it was difficult. After all, now the messenger of heaven did not understand at all where she was now. First of all, she tried to move as little as possible so as not to be heard. At some point, Haniel thought that it seemed to her and there was no one around. Deciding to sleep a little longer, she lay down on her side, under Dorkan's gaze. One day, while cleaning the Emperor's study, the maid unexpectedly found an egg in the eagle's cage. Another servant thought that Durakan might have postponed it, but the girl reminded him that he was a male. Then, the servant offered another version, deciding that the eagle could just bring him for a snack. The maid thought it was quite cruel, not knowing if birds even eat this. Then they decided to take the egg to the kitchen, so that the chef would cook it for Dorkan. The servant who carried it was amazed at how heavy this small egg was. At this time, Haniel was very dizzy from sudden movements and did not understand anything. When the chef heard that someone had entered the kitchen, he was in a state of confusion, not waiting for the guests to appear. But when he learned that he would cook for the Emperor's personal bird, the hero immediately changed his face, deciding to get down to business as soon as possible. Putting the egg on the table, he went to turn on the stove, dreaming aloud about how delicious he would fry it. Upon hearing about this, Haniel was horrified, after which she found herself in the chef's hand. Trying to break it, the hero was surprised that it did not even crack from the blow. The heroine at this time was in quiet shock, realizing that although the shell was strong, it was too much. Deciding that it was definitely impossible to hatch here, she slipped out of the hands of the stunned boss and rolled on the floor. The hero was confused, seeing that the egg did not break, falling to the floor and suddenly began to roll. Haniel thought that this was the reason she had chosen the nest, when suddenly, a mark appeared on the egg. At the same moment, the shell began to shine, which finally drove the chief into a stupor. Wasting no time, the heroine hurried away from the kitchen, hearing the hero's screams behind her. While in the hallway, the servants heard a strange noise and turned around to see the chef desperately chasing the egg. They joined the chase and ran after him in a crowd, shouting at the entire palace. Raising his leg slightly, Crusoe stopped the egg, came to the noise with his highness, and looked menacingly at the servants. Confused by their appearance, the chef admitted that he only wanted to cook a snack for Dorkan, but the egg ran away. Hearing this, the count made a lot of effort to keep a calm expression and sent the servants about their business. Picking up the egg from the floor, Richard and Crusoe discovered that it was the one from the cage of the imperial eagle. Turning it to them, they suddenly saw a shining sign right on the shell. The valet opened his mouth in surprise, and the emperor remembered the prophecy that a divine bird would descend to earth. And apparently, now in front of them was the very egg, the bird from which would bring eternal glory to the empire. Crusoe thought it must be a magic egg, but Richard remembered how the valet had thought it possessed the day before. However, in the count's opinion, nothing could be known for sure, because it was not known who had postponed it. But the emperor just turned around and went to his office without listening to him. Feeling the soft bedding beneath her again, Haniel realized that this stranger seemed to care about her. The next day, he summoned the Magi to examine the egg and make their guess. Where could it come from? Feeling the strong divine energy emanating from it, the wizards did not see anything sinister in the egg. In this world, magicians used elemental energy to cast spells. Dark magic was in the power of demons and was considered forbidden in the Empire. As for the divine energy, it was sacred, unique, and rare. Thinking that it would be the first time he would see someone hatch from an egg, Richard wondered what a divine being would look like. In his opinion, it would be great if it turned out to be a large hawk. Not knowing how to help the chick hatch, he began to study various information on this matter. One day, Durakan diligently hatched him, and the next day he disappeared somewhere. However, Richard believed that everything would be fine, and he would certainly cope with the care of the egg. Recently, even ministers who had previously only discussed the future empress had started talking about the egg for the first time. Meanwhile, while in the hands of the emperor, Haniel could feel his incredibly warm hands. Because of this, she almost fell asleep, shuddering with goosebumps, which the hero clearly felt. Bringing the egg to his ear, Richard thought he heard something from it. Not knowing what kind of bird it was, he decided that he would certainly take care of it. The next day, Crusoe remembered that he needed to talk to the fruit and thought that maybe his highness should try it. But Richard decided that he should let the valet tell such nonsense to someone. At that moment, a servant girl named Katerina decided to address him, standing nearby. She had read that flowers grew faster if you talked to them, and she thought that maybe it would work with an egg too. Turning to her, Richard decided that this was the point and wanted to try. But at this moment, she was already comforting Crusoe, who did not understand why the Emperor was ignoring him. Left alone with the egg and looking at it carefully, the Emperor did not know what to start talking about. Knowing that a chick would hatch, he thought that perhaps it was worth reading a children's book. However, he doubted that a divine being would like it. After thinking for a while, he decided that it would probably be better to sing a song. As she listened to him, Haniel didn't know that they were better, but she definitely liked his soft voice. The next day, as he stood in front of the egg, he thought that if they were on the battlefield, he could simply kill all those filthy ministers. The heroine considered the war something terrible and was shocked by the fact that people were fighting among themselves. A day later, Richard confessed to the egg that he was being eaten by wine when he thought of the soldiers who had lost their lives on the battlefield. Realizing that he was sad, Haniel wanted to hug the hero with her wide wings. A day later, having learned from him that demons had attacked on the border, the heroine was horrified. Stroking the egg with his hand, the Emperor was glad that his warriors had taken care of everything. Meanwhile, Haniel was already dreaming of hatching as soon as possible and slaying all the demons herself. Communicating with the egg every day, Richard came to the conclusion that he had no one to talk to openly, and only to him he could trust his thoughts. When the hero began to show his weaknesses, the heroine began to see herself in him. Despite the large number of acquaintances, he was as lonely as she was, so they could become good friends. And so time passed, and when the 30th day came, after it was lowered to the ground, the shell suddenly cracked. Shortly before, Crusoe had decided to ask His Majesty when someone would hatch from the egg. The valet sincerely hoped that it would not take decades. When they heard the crack, they immediately jumped up from their seats, and when they saw a crack in the shell, they were delighted. Richard immediately demanded that all the ministers be gathered in the throne room immediately. Later, when everyone was gathered, people were surprised that the same unknown egg was so small. Noticing that it periodically moved and made a crackling sound, everyone whispered violently, wondering when it would hatch. Tired of their chatter, the Emperor with a menacing gesture ordered everyone to be silent. Looking at each other in fright, everyone immediately fell silent, watching what was happening intently. Suddenly, the egg began to study the bright glow of golden color, and the mark on the shell began to pulsate. In complete amazement, the Enkidu 8 could not take his eyes off the cage in which the egg was. Finally, the long-awaited birth process began, and Richard fixed his eyes on the egg. Although it was forbidden to interfere with the birth process of the sacred bird, the Emperor hoped to speed it up somehow. Whatever the case, he decided to name the hatched creature Phoenix. He couldn't wait to see if it would be a large eagle, a sharp-shooting hawk, or an unknown variety. Suddenly, the upper half of the shell separated, and at that moment, time seemed to slow down for everyone. Expecting to see the majestic creation of heaven, a white ball of fluff with feathers and small red eyes suddenly caught their eyes. Looking at the chick in bewilderment, someone thought it was a bunch of cotton candy, while others took it for flour. Being the most surprised, the Emperor ordered everyone to shut their mouths immediately. He could not find words to express the surprise he was feeling now. In the palace hung a portrait of the supposed bird from the prophecy, against the background of which this one looked like a hamster against the background of a mammoth. When Haniel finally came into the world, she began to look at her surroundings and those present with interest. One of the ministers noted that the bird was indeed unknown, however, it was definitely a female. Most of all, it looked like a thick build. And it certainly could not be said that she was an eagle or a Yatsreb. After that, the civil servants laughed. Looking at them furiously, Richard wondered if they thought that he didn't understand it himself. However, according to legend, the bird must have golden feathers, which were just seen on the crest of this bird. Calling the phoenix to his finger, the hero decided that he must announce the birth of the sacred bird. Rumors about it spread throughout the empire very quickly, and the birth of the symbol was enough to increase respect for His Majesty. Returning to the office with the bird, the Emperor decided to clarify whether it was really a symbol of the empire. But the feathered miracle did not answer, looking at Richard with devoted eyes. Judging by the golden feathers, it was obvious that she was the bird from the legend and the symbol of the empire. A little earlier, Count Crusoe thought that it could be a reincarnation in the future. The bird would change its appearance. Turning to the portrait of the sacred being, the valet was sure that this creature would become just that. These words cooled the bewilderment of the nobles, who immediately supported Crusoe. However, considering this absurd, the emperor ordered everyone to get out immediately. And now, left with the bird in his study, he thought that the count was really right? Could it be that the bundle of cuteness sitting on the perch in front of him was really the legendary phoenix? After these words, the bird suddenly narrowed her eyes, and a blush appeared on her cheeks, as if she was embarrassed. Surprised by such a reaction, the hero wondered if the bird understood him. In response, the heroine began to flap her wings and chirp vigorously, wanting Richard to open the cage. Realizing her intentions, the hero released the bird, and it immediately appeared next to his head. Seeing how she clung to his shoulder, the emperor was puzzled by her attempts to caress him. Placing her on his finger, Richard decided that the name Phoenix did not suit such a cutie and wanted to change it. But seeing the real shock in the little eyes of the bird, the hero realized that she did not want it. After calming the bird, he went to lie in the bath for a while and think about everything that was happening. In fact, he even liked that cute with wings, but he couldn't openly show his emotions. Richard was convinced that he should not show his emotions because he could not rely on anyone. Most of all, he wanted to finally get used to loneliness for the next 10 or 20 years. Or it was necessary to find a real friend, which seemed even more impossible. The emperor thought it was hard to judge by appearance, but still, the phoenix was much smaller than other birds. However, it was possible that it would still grow and subsequently become large. Thinking that it would be better this way, the naked hero left the bathroom, starting to put on a robe in the room. Suddenly he noticed that the bird was staring at him, and its eyes were shining suspiciously. Deciding what he was imagining, Richard took a long breath and plopped down on the bed. After that, he turned his gaze back to Phoenix, who was sitting peacefully on the bedside table next to the bed. After carefully examining it, the emperor came to the conclusion that this was also not bad. Before going to bed, he wished her good night, to which he heard a joyful chirp in response. When he fell asleep, Haniel was glad that she had time to see everything well. First of all, she was impressed by the curves of the body and the relief of the muscles of the hero, who had a face similar to a god. In her opinion, even an eagle that considers itself the most beautiful bird will die in front of this person. Imagining herself next to him, the heroine decided that there would be no better match for her. She liked absolutely everything about him, and Haniel was determined to make Richard her friend. The next day, the caring Durahan brought a worm to the bird, scaring her to the point of shivering. From the mere sight of the wriggling invertebrate, the heroine's body seemed to be pierced by an electric current. I gracefully threw the worm up. The eagle deftly caught it in its beak, thereby showing the newcomer how to eat. She tried to explain in the language of birds that sacred birds do not eat such birds, but Durahan did not understand this. At that moment, Richard opened the cage and Haniel was happy to see her friend. He hoped that the phoenix remembered him, and in response, the bird began to flap its wings happily. The emperor thought that during all this time, she must have managed to get hungry. Summoning his valet, the hero immediately ordered food to be brought to his bird. Surprised by such a request, Crusoe did not even know what exactly to bring her. Assuming that she was eating bugs, the heroes suddenly saw Phoenix shake her head in disgust. The next option was grains, but apparently she didn't like them either. Deciding to bring berries in the end, the Count noticed that lately, His Majesty had become very close to the sacred bird. Richard thought she really liked him, judging by the way Phoenix looked at him. Hearing from him that this bird understands human speech, Crusoe was very surprised. The Emperor decided to ask her directly, would her appearance change over time and would she become bigger? Seeing that she nodded in response, the Earl and Richard were completely delighted. The valet began to dream of how she would turn into a huge bird from pictures or even into a hawk. Looking at him indignantly, Haniel didn't understand how this man dared to call her a hawk. After all, over time, she will be able to turn into her human image, becoming a young girl. Looking at Richard with delight, Haniel thought that in a little more she would surprise him greatly. After a while, the main dishes for poultry were served, including fresh berries, salads, and tartlets. Seeing the variety of berry delights on the table, the heroine was already shaking with hunger. Slapping Richard's ear with her wing in gratitude, she could not believe that she would eat such a yummy. The bird immediately began to eat the food, under the spellbound glances of the servants. The Emperor decided that it was better for all of them to stop staring, because surely the phoenix was uncomfortable. Having emptied all the plates, the heroine ate on the spot and lay down on the table satisfied. The servants were shocked that such a small bird could hold so much food. As for Crusoe, he was very glad to see his gentleman in a good mood. Flying up to the emperor, Haniel began to thank him heartily in bird's language. For the umpteenth time, Richard thought that a cute and charming bird was also a good option. That night, while His Majesty slept peacefully in bed, Haniel could not find peace. Remembering how he smacked her beak, she didn't expect that their first kiss would happen so soon. In the heavenly realm, the sequence was quite different, starting with an introduction, moving on to a proposal and a kiss during the wedding. But Richard turned out to be more straightforward and immediately stepped over several points, which won the heart of the heroine. The next morning, when Crusoe learned that the bird would now accompany His Majesty everywhere, he was shocked. Catherine was also puzzled because Phoenix was already constantly following her master. This confused the Earl, for the other creatures avoided Richard. The only exception was Durakan, while the other birds were afraid of the Emperor. Of course, Richard did not like this fact, but what is true. However, in his opinion, Phoenix was a very intelligent bird who recognized her master. After the conversation, Richard went to swordsmanship training, accompanied by his servants. The sun was shining brightly in the sky, and the maid Amanda thought it was a great day. Catherine agreed with her, thinking that winter was creeping in. She also wondered what was going on in the borderlands. As it turned out, everything went great, and now it was only necessary to make sure that there was no one left alive. Lady Catherine was actually a general of the Shadow Knights and a master of assassination who protected Richard. Currently, she served as the Emperor's unofficial bodyguard. In turn, Amanda had exceptional demon hunting skills. And now, thoughts about the day of their past did not give rest to the girls who constantly twisted them in their heads. During one of the battles with demons, the enemy army unexpectedly threw all its forces into attacking His Majesty. And it was not clear why all the demons, without exception, so purposefully rushed at the Emperor. They must have wanted something that only he had. Therefore, Catherine wanted to protect Richard at all costs, and in case of danger, she distributed hunters around the castle. However, if high-level demons hide their essence, it will be extremely difficult to figure them out. After a while, the hero went to a meeting with the ministers, where everyone began to praise the bird accompanying him. Richard had heard people discussing Phoenix before, but he didn't think that even ministers would get distracted during business meetings. Suddenly, the Duchess of West Porlington expressed a desire to have a small bird for herself, too. Another aristocrat raised his eyebrows ironically, because she already had several family symbols. The woman did not deny this, however. She simply could not resist such a cute creature. However, birds with plumage like Phoenix no longer existed, so she decided to get a sparrow or a... Richard began to get annoyed that instead of talking about business, they were talking about love for birds. Slamming the table, he decided to impose restrictions on bird breeding from that day on. The Duchess was the first to be indignant, whose dreams were shattered in an instant. But the hero knew that she did not really care about her pets, and if she really had free time, she could work. Calling the Phoenix to him, he stood up and began to leave, considering the whole conversation to be very stupid. Haniel began to chirp, hinting at food, and at that moment, Richard thought that there was no other bird in the world so beautiful. He could no longer deny that he had fallen completely in love with this magnificent bird. Later, after drinking tea with a bird, the Emperor didn't remember the last time he was so happy. Thanks to this little bird, he no longer felt lonely. However, unlike Durkan, if the Phoenix is outside, it will quickly become food for other birds. Therefore, it was decided to close all the windows, even when she was nearby, and not to let her go outside. Later, when he came to the master's room, Crusoe tried to call St. Phoenix to him. In response, the bird did not even flinch, wrinkling its beak a little, which seemed to the valet to be an obvious overkill. Looking at this, Richard felt proud and decided that she would not fly to just anyone. Looking at her dejected comrade, Catherine also decided to try her luck. Suddenly, Phoenix responded to her call and flew into the maid's hands on her own. Crusoe was shocked, his mouth agape in surprise, and the Emperor was completely confused. Feeling a bitter mixture of envy and jealousy inside, Richard did not understand why not him. It was also a mystery to him how the Phoenix could make such a cute face while sitting in someone else's hand. After a while, starting to take a bath, he put a small pool next to him, where he sat the bird. Contemplating his naked body again, Haniel decided that the hero had no shame or conscience. Blushing a lot, she didn't understand how it was possible to swim together before the wedding. And in those moments when Richard stroked her head with his finger, she completely died of shame. And yet, no matter how much she thought, the hero did not cease to seem like an ideal partner. According to the laws of the heavenly kingdom, in order to marry an angel and a person, certain conditions must be met. First of all, she needs to keep the fact that she is the guardian of heaven a secret. Anyway, hearing his sweet voice, Haniel felt that this man would love her sincerely. Suddenly, Richard began to dream that if Phoenix spoke like a parrot, she could call him by his first name. The hero remembered that after he became emperor, everyone began to address him only by his title. So if she spoke, he'd want right to call him Richard. Looking into his eyes, the heroine remembered that whenever she was lonely, she remembered the heavens. Starting to chirp joyfully, she decided to sing until her eardrums burst. Getting out of the bath, the hero remembered that at one of the meetings the topic of marriage was raised. As he began to dress, he did not understand whether he really demanded so much from his future wife. As Phoenix chirped desperately, deciding that this was not the case, he wiped her feathers, thinking that his fate could be heaven-sent. The emperor once heard that Cupid shoots into people's hearts. He would be happy to get such an arrow, pretending to shoot a bird. Seeing how she defiantly fell on her back, Richard laughed heartily. That same night, in one village, there was a deathly silence, and the sky was black. Suddenly, right in front of one of the villagers, a demon appeared, staring at his victim. Hoping that it was all just a bad dream, the man, after a second, deafened all the surroundings with a heart-rending scream. Demons began to appear on the border, and although there were no casualties yet, the number of attacks increased. Therefore, the emperor decided to expand the army of wizards and send them to their places. While he was thinking about it, Crusoe was standing in front of him with a large stack of documents, who didn't understand why Richard was ignoring him. Looking coldly at the Count, the hero gestured for the documents to be handed over to him. The valet was offended that His Highness was so courteous to the bird and was rude to him. Of course, it was great that she loved the sacred bird so much, but the emperor couldn't spend all his time with her. Deciding that it would be better for Richard to find a woman, Crusoe coughed defiantly, attracting attention. He hoped for His Majesty's understanding that the matter could no longer be postponed. In addition, if the emperor did not like official meetings, then Crusoe was ready to arrange a trip for him incognito. Richard did not like these meetings and closed the topic a couple of months ago, but again, this issue was raised. Nevertheless, Crusoe was right, and it would not be possible to postpone it any longer, because as emperor, he was obliged to take care of the well-being of citizens. After a little thought, the Count decided to offer to find a bride from another country. To the hero's surprise, his lordship immediately agreed, considering it a great idea. Shocked that his idea was accepted, the valet took the emperor at his word and hurried to compile a list of applicants. At this time, Richard turned to Phoenix and his uncle on his shoulder and decided that he had to show her to the delegation. At night, she remembered that at today's conference, she felt the presence of a demon and did not understand if he was among the aristocrats. However, it was difficult to determine anything in the bird's body, and it was necessary to turn into a human as soon as possible. Closing her eyes and falling into a sweet sleep, Haniel heard that she had to hide the fact that she was an angel. But realizing that it would not be possible to hide this forever, the heroine wondered what to do if her partner still finds out. Although it was impossible, Heliana decided that in this case, she would give her special permission. Haniel also wanted to know what if she was loved in the body of a bird before she became a human. But in response, she heard only the ringing laughter of the goddess, who began to gradually dissolve into space. When she woke up, she did not understand what kind of dream it was and why the voice disappeared at that particular moment. At this time, the maids were helping Richard dress for the portrait, and seeing the awakening of the bird, Catherine immediately began to be touched by it. Haniel sat modestly in her bed, covered with a blanket, causing tenderness even in Richard. The maid standing behind him found this sight extremely cute, but suddenly the hero ordered everyone to be silent, terrifying the girls. He wished that the court tailor should be brought to him at once. The woman immediately arrived at the call, bringing with her 2 lovely dresses of her choice for the bird. After looking at them carefully, Richard was silent, and Catherine suggested that he consider the option on the right. The girl was sure that Phoenix would like this dress and dreamed of seeing her in it. When it finally happened, she and the dressmaker could not restrain their emotions from tenderness. Even the emperor was shocked by the magnificence of this bird, covered with blush at the sight of it. He hoped that the artist was ready to capture this miracle, which would be hung throughout the palace. At first, Richard wanted the sacred bird to become a hawk, but as time went on, he realized that cuteness was its main trait. After a short time, all the rooms, corridors, and halls of all the palaces of the empire were decorated with paintings depicting the holy bird. The maids who saw them envied those who worked in the sunny palace and had the opportunity to observe this cutie live. At that moment, they had no idea that a couple of meters away from them, the heroine was peacefully flying over the stairs. Suddenly, they saw a servant who was desperately running somewhere at full speed. Less than a second later, the unknown hero ran past them, leaving the maids confused. Meanwhile, another servant reported to the valet about the sudden disappearance of the bird. At this moment, Crusoe didn't know what terrified him more, the news of the disappearance or the emperor's reaction when he would find out. First of all, he decided to call all the knights and send them to search for them immediately. Frantically continuing to develop a plan of action, the Count did not notice the arrival of His Majesty. Richard wondered what was going on here, which made Crusoe sweat. Almost crying, the valet decided to confess what had happened, looking at the emperor in fear. Horrified by the news, Richard also ordered all the knights to be gathered and Duran brought to him. At this time, Haniel decided to fly around for a while, peacefully floating along the path. Ahead of her, she saw maids hanging laundry, and they had delicious tomatoes on the table. Quietly sitting down next to the plate, the heroine began to vigorously absorb fresh yummy. Seeing her, the girls were touched at first, but suddenly it dawned on them that this was the same sacred bird. They didn't understand what she was doing here, or how she had ever managed to fly so far. Deciding that if the emperor lost her, it would be better to catch the bird, the maids tried to do so, but Haniel eluded them. Looking at the people running on the ground and calling her, the bird did not understand why she was being chased. Even the proud Durahan flew over it as if he was aiming for a hunt. Not believing that they wanted to catch her so much, Haniel decided that it was still dangerous to fly out into the street. Back on her pillow, she wondered when Richard would come. Tired of the long flights of the day, she calmly lay down on her side and fell asleep peacefully. Late in the evening, tired from the long and unsuccessful search, the emperor returned to his study. Not understanding where she could have gone, he suddenly heard a familiar rumbling. Seeing the phoenix in the cage, which was quietly sniffing in her sleep, the hero fell into a stupor. Waking her up and taking her in his arms, he decided that she had frightened him. Looking at him in surprise, the heroine did not understand why he decided so. Touching her beak with his nose, Richard wanted her not to throw him again. Then Haniel suddenly realized that he had been trying to find her all day. Most of all, the emperor didn't want to lock the bird in a cage, but in her opinion, he didn't need to worry anymore. Outside of the Apollinaire Empire, there were many small kingdoms. They allied with the Empire and even took part in the war against demons. However, the demons were hiding in human form and tormenting others, and high-ranking individuals were almost impossible to identify. Because of this, people began to doubt each other, which caused a lot of trouble. In order to fight the demons, the Empire had to strengthen its alliance with small kingdoms, for which the delegation came. The main problem was that the Emperor did not have a wife, which Crusoe diligently tried to fix. During one of the meetings, he remembered that the ladies from the Ban Kingdom in the west were very beautiful and strong. After all, His Majesty was probably also interested in the Sand Kingdom. Besides, he would still have to attend the ball. Realizing that there was no other way out, Richard agreed to go, thinking that his fate was really sealed. The valet was doing his job too quickly, and if this continues, the wedding will be very soon. In the meantime, Grand Marshal Chad came to see him, bringing His Majesty what he had asked for. The hero also considered Count Crusoe to be a very impatient person. However, this was a matter of course because the Emperor was a very attractive man. Unfortunately, the girl who claimed the place of the Empress was never able to take it. She was crazy about Richard, blushing every time she met him and looking at him with delight. But against all odds, it seemed that His Majesty did not like anyone at all. When the Emperor himself cannot find love, the formal selection of candidates inevitably begins. Noticing that Chad was thinking about something, Richard wondered if he wanted to say something else. This was not so, however. The Marshal perfectly understood the feelings that His Highness was experiencing. After reviewing the list of applicants, the emperor came to the conclusion that Crusoe was very partial to the work. Looking at Chad, he didn't understand how much longer he could postpone the wedding. At this moment, sitting in her cage, Haniel let out a low chirp, looking intently at the emperor. Suddenly, the marshal remembered her existence and fixed his gaze on the cage. The sacred bird, in real life, turned out to be much more wonderful than in the paintings in the corridor. In the meantime, the emperor had finished checking the documents, and Chad could go about his business in peace. After bowing out, the hero immediately left, leaving Richard and the bird alone. Overjoyed at this, the emperor hurried to open the cage and release the phoenix. Putting it on his finger, he decided to clarify that from tomorrow it would be a little noisy in the palace. Hearing the chirping in response again, he wondered what exactly she wanted to say. He had long noticed that depending on the situation, she tweeted differently every time. Though she wasn't a mighty hawk, Richard wanted her to speak one day. Looking carefully at the bird, the hero remembered that it had hatched quite a long time ago. The goddess first descended to Earth and stayed there for 100 days, which was not a short time in the Empire. The emperor wondered if the phoenix wanted to celebrate 100 days since her birth. The bird's eyes immediately sparkled from what he heard, which was perceived by the hero as consent. However, the heroine would be much more satisfied if he just took her as his wife. After all, on the 100th day she will become a person, and whatever it was, they are destined to be together. In the world of people, Richard was the closest to her, and having become a person, Haniel dreamed of kissing him first of all. So, one by one, delegations began to arrive, and the quiet palace gradually began to liven up, thanks to the guests. But the most brilliant thing was that the future empress might appear among the guests. All eyes were fixed on the emperor, and Crusoe was the most excited. The count could hardly keep a calm look, mentally jumping out of his trousers with joy that his master would finally choose a companion. Fortunately, today His Majesty was even more handsome than usual. However, the valet also hoped that the emperor would smile at least a little, because this would bribe the women even more. Deep down, Richard knew that whatever it was, Crusoe was right. But he couldn't stop thinking about Phoenix, who was languishing in her cage from loneliness. Unfortunately, she could not be taken with her to a meeting with delegations, which is why the hero sat with a gloomy look. Most of all, Richard wanted to finish everything here as soon as possible and return to his bird. When the first delegation began to call on him, Crusoe made a last, desperate attempt to make the emperor smile. However, hearing that it was a delegation from the Ban Kingdom, His Grace decided to stop talking and hurry up to meet him. Ban was a fairly large country that was located beyond the Western Seas. They had provided considerable support in the war against demons, so the emperor greeted them personally. The mysteriousness of the Ban royal family was enhanced by the veil they wore. And the main feature of the nobility of the kingdom was gray eyes, which seemed to pierce the gaze to the depths of the soul. Approaching Emperor Richard, Ban's delegation respectfully greeted the monarch with a bow. The hero himself met them with a stony face, looking intently at his guests. A candidate for his wife from their family, she immediately noticed that, as the rumors said, he was very cold. Turning around, the emperor walked forward, calling the guests to follow him. One of them, looking at the candidate, decided that His Majesty was not very interested in her. But the girl believed that he should take care of himself, because women do not like divorced men. Left perplexed by her words, the hero did not understand what he had to do with it at all. The princess herself ran away from him, although the hero understood that he himself was dishonest in his connections. Considering himself a fool, he decided to try and also find a bride. The hero decided to consider nobles for this, but the girl offered him to flirt with the maids. Suddenly she froze in place, seeing the smile on the emperor's face for the first time. Looking at him fascinated, the candidate decided that it was impossible to meet such handsome men anywhere else. Not understanding why he was smiling, she looked in the same direction and saw a portrait of His Highness. Before that, the girl did not know that there are people who look better in real life than in a portrait. Suddenly, her gaze shifted to the side and the candidate saw a bird proudly perched on the emperor's shoulder. Being perplexed, she thought aloud about what kind of quail was this. Hearing this, Richard looked at the girl furiously, and a vein began to pulse on his face. Meanwhile, sorting through papers in his office, Amanda and Crusoe discussed His Majesty's upcoming engagement. When Haniel learned from them that he was going to marry a foreigner, she was horrified. At this time, hearing how his precious bird was called Quail, the emperor went into a rage. Realizing what this threatened, one of the servants hurried to inform the guests that it was the sacred phoenix. Everyone around froze in amazement because they were sure that this bird would be larger than an eagle. Many considered it a disgrace that such a small bird personified a great empire. However, although the rumors turned out to be false, the Ban Kingdom was too weak to challenge the symbol of the empire. In addition, to call her a quail was really too rude on their part. Therefore, the heads of the Ban royal family apologized, citing what they believed to be the symbol of the eagle. However, from the faces of His Highness, as well as the imperial servants, they realized that they had already tarnished their reputation. Seeing all this, one of the 5 Grand Dukes, Jacques Pierre, whose symbol was an eagle, approached the emperor. He wanted His Majesty not to take these words to heart, for they were only ignoramuses from the desert. But Richard was very glad that he hadn't taken Phoenix with him to the meeting. Before the evening arrival of the next delegation, the hero decided to return to the bird and rest a little. It has been almost 100 days since her birth, and when that date is reached, a blessing must descend upon the earth. According to legend, on the last day, the goddess will return to the heavenly realm and the Apollinaire Empire will find peace. Jacques thought that His Highness should prepare a gift for the phoenix for that date. That night, the heroine lay with her wings spread from fatigue, not understanding why there were so many guests today. However, Richard wished her good night so sweetly that it more than covered all the hardships. Haniel hoped that he would continue to love her, even when she became human. After all, she herself loved him to death and was perplexed that he had not yet understood this. And if nothing interferes out of love, then she will be able to fulfill her mission to fight demons. Looking at the sleeping emperor, the heroine hoped that they would still be able to enjoy peace. On the 100th day after the birth of the phoenix, a noisy ball was held in the palace. Delegations visiting the empire were looking forward to seeing the bird live. However, Haniel herself felt depressed that she had not turned into a human. Sitting next to her, Richard noticed that his bird looked unusually sad. Deciding that perhaps she was not well, he put her on his finger and decided to find out what exactly was wrong. Assuming that she was just hungry, the emperor knew from her eyes alone that he was right. The heroine agreed that first you need to eat, and everything else should be decided after eating. A minute later, a maid was standing next to them, holding a tray of snacks in her hand. At this point, Haniel felt truly happy, and Richard was happy to see that her mood had improved. Thinking that it was very cool to be cute, the bird began to greedily devour sweets. When she finished everything, she suddenly began to feel dizzy, and the heroine thought that there was alcohol in the food. But when she realized what the feeling was, she knew she had to run urgently. Meanwhile, the next delegation brought with them a huge gift for the emperor, covered with a thick cloth. Their kingdom also considered birds sacred, as did the Apollinaire Empire. Therefore, as a gift, they brought a giant statue of a bird made entirely of gold. Looking thoughtfully at the gift, Richard decided that he would need to make a giant statue of the phoenix. Thinking that the sculpture of his bird would look much better, he looked at the place where the bird was supposed to be sitting. But seeing an empty pillow there, the emperor was completely perplexed. At this time, having flown some distance from the palace, the heroine landed on a tree branch. She began to catch her breath convulsively, as it turned out to be very difficult to fly on a full stomach. Suddenly, she saw a member of the delegation from Ban walking down the road, sighing long. Looking at him carefully, Haniel concluded that this guy was quite handsome. Noticing the bird, the hero hovered for a while, not expecting to meet a quail here. From such an insult, the heroine flew into a rage and, like lightning, rushed at the offender. Flying closer, she began to beat him on the cheek with all her strength. Listening to her angry chirping and rubbing the place of beatings, the hero decided that the bird liked him. Feeling like she was about to transform into a human again, Haniel instantly disappeared into the bushes. A second later, looking at her hands, she was delighted that she had finally succeeded. However, the first thing to do was to find clothes, which was difficult in this situation. Hearing some rustle, the heroine most of all did not want to be caught. Pushing the bushes apart with his hands, the emperor suddenly appeared from behind them, who was very happy to find the phoenix. As soon as she turned into a bird, Haniel stared at him with completely innocent eyes. A member of the delegation was very surprised to learn that it was the same sacred bird. Hearing that he thinks she is cute, Richard turned to the hero in bewilderment. As it turned out, the reason for such words was that a couple of minutes ago, this bird stroked his cheek. Confused by what she heard, the emperor called Phoenix and silently went to the palace. Since the bird showed sympathy for others, it was now forbidden to meet with anyone. Surprised at how cunning the phoenix turned out to be, Richard wondered if all birds were like that. At that moment, a servant came in, inviting His Majesty to the ball, where the members of the delegation were waiting for him. After apologizing to the bird for locking it up, the hero decided to return as soon as possible. After waiting for him to leave, Haniel was glad that it would be convenient for her to write off the cage. Turning around and forgetting what she looks like in human form, the heroine went to look for a mirror. In order not to be considered a pervert, she had to get dressed, and she decided to take the emperor's things. Due to the fact that Haniel was a small bird, she was embarrassed about herself, but in this guise she looks just like the heavenly angels. Finding a mirror and looking at the young and attractive girl in the reflection, she hoped that Richard would like her. Meanwhile, in the crystal hall of the Sun Palace, a grand banquet was being held. The emperor stood on one of the balconies, burning the glances of the guests from the band, who had insulted the phoenix and even managed to please her. Watching his expression, Crusoe did not understand anything, being confused. However, looking in the same direction as His Highness, the hero suddenly understood everything. Richard's gaze was directed to where Princess Melissa of the Ban Kingdom was standing right now. The Count thought they were done after comparing Felix to a quail, but did he really like her? Suddenly, pretending to be tired, the emperor decided to return to his chambers. As he clenched his fists in jealousy, Crusoe beamed with happiness, thinking that next time he would need to prepare. When Richard arrived in the room, he was shocked, not understanding whether all the banquets really took so much energy. Turning to the bed, he suddenly found that someone was lying there. As he drew his sword from its scabbard, he tried to understand how this man had entered here. Judging by her hairstyle, it was a woman and she was not from the delegation. But the hero was inclined to believe that perhaps it was a high-ranking demon who decided to set up an ambush. Suddenly, he noticed that the girl was lying with her eyes open and became even more alert. Hearing footsteps, Haniel abruptly sat up on the bed, rejoicing at the long-awaited meeting. But at the same moment, the blade of the sword rested on her neck, sending the heroine into a stupor. Richard decided to find out directly. Could it be that there was a demon in front of him now? Haniel's eyes clouded with horror, and she did not understand why he was angry and called her a demon. Being in a state of shock, she could not immediately find the words and, gathering her strength, decided to speak. But Richard didn't let her say a word, filling his sword with fighting energy and repeating his question. Seeing her clutching the blanket, the emperor thought that the demon was hiding a weapon there. Then the hero decided to clarify that if she only gave him a reason, he would not stand on ceremony. Suddenly, a strong wind blew open the window, penetrating the room where they were. Completely unexpected, Richard covered his face with his hand from the powerful gusts of air. After a couple of seconds, the wind subsided, but the heroine seemed to disappear into thin air. However, since the room was empty, it meant that she could only escape through a crack or jump out of the window. The emperor thought that high-ranking demons could really use magic to change their appearance. At that moment, the valet came to him, deciding to find out who was the girl whom His Majesty was staring at in the banquet hall. However, when Crusoe saw the drawn sword in the emperor's hand, he was immediately speechless in surprise. As it turned out, according to Richard, they had unexpected guests in the palace. Noticing that the phoenix had also disappeared somewhere, the emperor was completely furious. Devices against dark magic were installed in the solar palace, and even if the intruder managed to escape, he would not go far. Rumors of a demon attack on the palace spread instantly, and everyone realized that even the imperial palace was not safe. Meanwhile, Haniel regained consciousness, still lying on Richard's bed, covered with a blanket. Thanks to the strong wind, she was able to transform unnoticed and seemed to have briefly lost consciousness. Remembering that her beloved tried to attack her, tears welled up in the heroine's eyes. She was sure that Richard would recognize her immediately, but the hero turned out to be a simple fool. Not wanting to be there, Haniel flew out the window, determined to do as she wanted to do in the future. After flying around a little, the heroine finally managed to find a deserted place, which turned out to be a wardrobe. Having transformed into a human, Haniel considered it a good place, because she was cold without a blanket. So far, she has found it difficult to control her transformation into a human, possibly because of the alcohol. Not finding anything better, the heroine decided to wear the clothes of people with a veil on their faces for the time being. She understood that she had simply made a mistake and was only a stranger to Richard, but for some reason her heart ached. Suddenly there was the sound of a door opening, which terrified Haniel. Hearing that a man and a woman had entered here, the heroine did not understand what was happening. Looking from behind the cover, she saw a couple who were openly clinging to each other, merging in a kiss. Looking closer, Haniel suddenly recognized the man who turned out to be the guest who thought she was a quail. Feeling indignant, she decided that she should have him harder last time. Afraid that she might be noticed, the heroine accidentally touched the rack and fell to the floor. The hero's girlfriend was immediately confused, because, according to him, no one should have been here. The man tried to justify himself, but not wanting to listen to anything, the madame walked away. Turning with irritation to the place where the noise came from, the hero was sure that there was no one there. However, now he wondered who so brazenly dared to interrupt his amorous pleasures. Shocked by what was happening, Haniel did not know what to do now. However, it was too late to do anything, and the hero found the girl behind the rack. Seeing the veil on her face, she thought that this could be a maid from his kingdom. The heroine sat silently, staring at him and desperately fighting a panic attack. Looking closer, he suddenly discovered that the girl in front of him was of extraordinary beauty. Sitting down on one knee and holding out his hand to her, the man wanted to know who exactly was in front of him. Touching her lips with his fingers, the hero decided that since she interfered with him, then she owed a debt. At this time, the emperor suddenly entered them, who heard sounds in the cloakroom and thought it was a rat. Richard didn't understand why Prince Ban was here now. After all, he had been told to return to his chambers. The man immediately began to make excuses, pretending that he was just going to do it. But the emperor noticed the hero's red cheeks, traces of lipstick on his face, and unbuttoned buttons on his shirt. His Majesty considered this unworthy and wished that the prince would now do such a thing only in his palace. Suddenly, he noticed a girl sitting on the floor, who immediately turned her gaze away. Covering it with his hand, the prince clarified that his lady was very shy and wanted the emperor to leave the wardrobe. Shocked by his audacity, Richard decided to leave, wanting to catch the demon before he escaped. As soon as he left, the hero furiously turned to the stranger, who, in his opinion, was to blame for everything. At the same moment, something flew directly into the prince's eyes, causing him to get lost for a second. When he came to his senses, he went completely berserk, considering it incredible audacity. As he was about to say everything to this, he suddenly noticed that the girl had already disappeared. Staring at the place where she had just been sitting, the hero did not understand where she had gone. Meanwhile, still angry at the bastard who had called her quail, Haniel wanted to find her weapon as soon as possible. The next day, Richard, Crusoe, Catherine, and Amanda were restless, worrying about Wright. The maids hoped that the kidnapper would not eat that innocent bird. Besides, the valet did not understand where such a small bird would look for food. However, the emperor was most indignant, doomedly covering his face with his hands. The fact that someone was able to get into the emperor's bedroom was already a serious threat, but the bird also disappeared. Not understanding where such a powerful demon could come from, Richard decided that now he should really be afraid. The mere thought of Phoenix being killed terrified him. Crusoe hoped that at least Durahan would return to them, for he was a strong eagle who had made a great contribution to the war. The emperor knew that Durahan was very intelligent and had helped him many times. However, even the royal mages couldn't figure it out, finding no trace of dark magic. Even the most skilled demons are unable to completely erase their tracks. Therefore, Richard did not want to just sit and rely on Durahan for everything. He was sure that he had seen a demon the night before, and according to the maids, he had silver hair. Suddenly, he remembered that the servant girl of the Ban Kingdom he had met in the dressing room of the Ban Kingdom at night also had this hair color. Shocked that he hadn't thought of it before, the emperor ordered the prince to be brought to him. A few minutes later, when he learned that he needed the same maid, the hero did not understand what was the need for this. However, Richard didn't answer or even look in his direction. As always, Crusoe began to speak instead of him, which greatly annoyed the prince. He believed that even a powerful emperor should not treat an innocent overseas prince like that. Clenching his fist, he didn't understand if their country was really so weak that they couldn't even cross such an attitude. However, after humbling himself, the hero decided that all the maids of the Ban Kingdom had dark hair, and yesterday's one also had such hair. The valet did not trust him, and then the prince thought that maybe he should personally bring all the maids? But Crusoe did not see the need for this, because the guards would check everything anyway, which annoyed the prince even more. As she walked out of the emperor's study, she thought furiously that she herself would like to find this woman herself. After that night, she seemed to evaporate, and even among Melissa's maids there is no such girl. Her face may have been veiled, but the hero captured her scarlet eyes and silver hair well in his head. He hoped that this girl would certainly be found, and she would receive the punishment she deserved. After some time, after a long and uninterrupted flight, Haniel found herself in the possession of the Duchy of Moderland. First of all, she decided to land and rest for a while, realizing that she might die of exhaustion. It was for this reason that she envied large birds, which were much more hardy. Descending and comfortably sitting on the grass, the heroine suddenly noticed a light on the side, which blinded her eyes. When she saw her staff there, she immediately forgot about her fatigue and jumped happily on the spot. Turning into a human, Haniel decided that the weapon was probably already waiting for her. This weapon, given by her master, was invisible to others and belonged only to the heroine thanks to holy magic. Deciding to take it with her, Haniel absorbed the staff into herself, feeling that she was finally ready for battle. At the same moment, she tried to become a bird, but to her surprise, nothing worked. At the same time, Heliana's voice sounded in her head, who decided to remind her that after taking the staff, she needed to be a little human. When the adaptation period ends, the heroine will be able to reincarnate into a bird again. Only now, Haniel began to realize how much she had become stuck. Wanting to know when it would all end, she suddenly felt an arrow rapidly approaching her back. The heroine did a somersault and dodged, and the arrow pierced the trunk of the tree, starting to emit black smoke. At this time, the carriage, moving along the forest road, stopped at the edge of the forest. Coming out of it, the knight doubted that they would succeed, because there were too many enemies to deal with everything at once. Following him, the former Emperor Apollinaire stepped out into the street. His wife and Richard's mother also wanted to go outside, but the man decided that it was better for her to stay in the carriage. Suddenly, she heard the scream of the knight Leona, who had been injured by the demon and was infected with dark magic. Meanwhile, Haniel was already watching them from behind the tree and saw the wounded warrior's lips turn purple. An arrow shot by the demon unexpectedly flew into a tree next to the heroine, but apparently they were aiming at these people. Leona, who was in pain, looked critical. The rest of the knights were confused, their eyes full of despair. Haniel realized that if she stayed away now, they would all surely die. Then she decided to come out of the shadows, frightening the wary knights with her appearance. Seeing fear and bewilderment in their eyes, the heroine did not understand why she caused such a reaction in them. Once, she had already heard from her mentor that people were kind to those who smiled. Remembering this, she broke into a wide smile, which caused even more confusion among the soldiers. However, the former empress considered her appearance unusual, because the girl was wearing expensive clothes and long hair. Meanwhile, after analyzing the situation, the knights came to the conclusion that there was no point in running, and it was better to try to fight. Richard's father then decided that it would be better for his wife to go to the carriage and get out of there, no matter what happened. Suddenly, a demon came out of the forest, who thought that when people were on their guard, the desire to kill only became stronger. The knights immediately prepared for battle, watching the enemy intently. The former emperor wanted them to guard the carriage at all costs and protect the mistress. Wishing them a speedy death, the demon drew his bow and fired an arrow at them, imbued with dark magic. The arrow flew straight at the woman, but suddenly someone's hand stopped it right in the air. Clenching her hand a little harder, Haniel calmly broke the arrow in half. She knew that the demon arrows had been sent and were capable of killing a person in an instant. The demon fell into a stupor, his mouth open in surprise and incomprehension. How could this human specimen grab an arrow so easily? Not expecting to have to use the staff like this, the heroine took it out with the help of magic and prepared for battle. At that moment, next to the demon, his brother appeared, who came to the rescue. Wondering how they dared to attack humans in her presence, Haniel furiously charged into battle. Not having time to follow her movements, the demon saw a person move so fast for the first time. Like a flash of lightning, the heroine jumped from place to place, disappearing into thin air and confusing enemies. In an instant, she was directly above the demon archer, striking him with a staff of colossal strength. The second demon fled in fear, and then Haniel proudly thought that killing these monsters was indeed her element. Judging by the skills they saw, the knights decided that she was an assassin and wanted to know her name immediately. But the former emperor decided that if she were a murderer, she would already be aiming at them. In addition, now it was necessary to urgently hit the road and take Leona to the doctor. Deciding not to waste time and move out, the former empress invited the stranger to go with them. First of all, she wanted to repay in full for the heroine's help, but first she had to save the wounded woman. As a result, a few minutes later, Haniel was sitting with them in the carriage, watching the suffering girl. Putting her hand on her shoulder, the heroine wanted to imperceptibly heal the knight, deciding that everything would be fine. Meanwhile, after examining the clothes from the savior, the former empress decided that it was a royal outfit. Her name was Scarlet, and the former emperor was Iradion, and they fell in love, not knowing each other at all. Richard's birth was a real blessing and a gift from heaven for them. Since childhood, he was incredibly intelligent and especially well. She excelled in fencing. However, due to his northern nature, he never met the girl, which greatly disturbed his parents. In the society of the Empire, Apollinaire, the authority of the emperor and the power of the empress played an important role. Therefore, wishing her son only happiness, Scarlet wanted him to find a wife as soon as possible. After observing the rescuer, the woman came to the conclusion that she was special. Her angelic beauty, coupled with royal grace, made her an excellent match for Richard. Scarlet also wanted to know how exactly the girl slew demons, and was she really a magical swordsman? She also wondered where the young lady came from and why she wandered alone in the forest. The woman was embarrassed for so many questions, but Haniel pretended that everything was fine. She had learned from the goddess that sometimes it was easier to lie, so she pretended to be a magical swordsman from the west. Madame pondered her words while the girl felt remorse for lying. Scarlet remembered that Princess Sylvania had silver hair and wondered if it was her highness. Looking away and laughing nervously, Haniel pretended that it was so. The former empress immediately grabbed the heroine's hands, deciding that they must be wounded from contact with the arrow. However, the girl's hands were clean and without any flaw, which was very surprising. Becoming even more nervous, Haniel suddenly thought that this was the legacy of their family. Hearing this, the former empress was even more amazed, looking at the girl in surprise. For a long time, the emperor and empress had been the people most exposed to threats from demons. It was considered impossible to be born with an antidote unless she was a demon herself. However, since the special necklace around Scarlet's neck did not work, this option could be ruled out. Therefore, if this heroine really had a counteraction to the demon's venom, then she was destined to marry Richard. Arriving at the nearest village, it turned out that the magician was busy now and could not examine the victim. The knights were furious, believing that the mage was obliged to help, according to the decree of the emperor, but everything was to no avail. Watching the negotiations from the window, the former empress understood that they did not add up. Deciding to go and talk in person, she left Haniel in the carriage with the victim. The heroine looked with horror at the festering hand of the wounded woman, assuming that she had died. Deciding to check this, Haniel gently put her fingers to the girl's mouth and nose. Feeling her breath and realizing that she was still alive, the heroine was very happy about it. However, she needed serious help and Haniel could not provide it without revealing her powers. Suddenly, she remembered the words of a mentor who believed that people believed in the medicinal properties of herbs that could be sold. Finding a bunch of ordinary herbs, she decided that she only needed to make them believe that this plant was healing. The most important thing is to behave absolutely calmly. Abruptly opening the carriage door, she stepped out to meet Scarlet and Iradion, sending them into a stupor. The heroine decided that if she just waited, the patient would die, and the magician was unlikely to help here. Dismayed by her words, the former monarchs did not know what could be done now. At this time, Haniel mentally tried to collect herself in order to maintain the most imperturbable and believable appearance. Showing them a plucked tuft of grass, she pretended that it was a healing plant. The tone in which she spoke did not immediately please Scarlet, who immediately remembered the apothecary from the continent. Haniel pretended that this special herb had been passed down in her family from generation to generation, but the woman considered it suspicious. However, in the heroine's gaze, one could read that her words were true, and perhaps this plant could really help. The former empress decided that since she was their savior, perhaps she should believe her. Thinking that her beliefs had not worked, Haniel decided to resort to the latter plan. Turning around, she thought that if they didn't need it, then it was okay, although it was unlikely that they would buy such a thing anywhere else. Realizing that there was no other way out, Scarlet decided to trust the heroine. After a while, the heroine poured the boiled decoction of the herb into a plate to feed the patient. Everyone was perplexed by this greenish slurry, and Haniel meanwhile prepared to secretly pour her power into it. The most important thing was to act carefully and try not to get caught. The amount of divine power that could be used in the human realm was limited. Therefore, the heroine was glad that she had the opportunity to tune in. Watching how she fed Leona, Scarlet, and Iradion believed that everything would work out. Suddenly, the warrior's body began to rapidly cleanse, which startled the woman. A few seconds later, the girl safely got out of bed, as if she had never been sick. Scarlet immediately ran to her, hoping that the warrior was all right. However, the girl felt great and felt like her body even had more energy. The knights were shocked at how quickly she healed, and that there was not a single scar left on her body. Pleased with herself, Haniel stood modestly on the sidelines, glad that she was able to help. Suddenly, Leona came close to her, looking directly into the heroine's eyes. Surprised, Haniel did not understand what a girl with such a serious face wanted to say to her. Suddenly, Leona bowed to the ground, thanking her for saving her life and wanting to repay it by inviting her to dinner. In general, Haniel wanted to return to the palace as soon as possible, but it was already quite dark outside and she felt hungry. Therefore, she decided to stay with them for one day, and later, sitting at the table, the heroine was glad that she did not miss such a yummy. While she tasted the meat delicacies, Leona only had time to slip her new portions. Hoping that Richard would understand the reason for her delay, Haniel suddenly realized how much she missed him. Throughout the evening, Scarlet carefully studied the behavior and character of her new acquaintance. Seeing her manners and kindness, the former empress had no doubt that the girl was the daughter of Queen Sylvania. Therefore, the woman was sure that the heroine would be ideal for the role of Richard's wife and the new empress. However, it was still necessary to somehow convince this stubborn man to get married, which was quite a difficult task. Suddenly, she heard the voice of young people nearby, who were discussing the latest news. As it turned out, the election of a new empress is scheduled in the imperial palace. Hearing about this, Scarlet was indescribably delighted, thinking that it was a sign from above. In the meantime, the emperor did not hesitate or neglect his work. However, it was clear from his face that he was much more worried than it might seem. Looking at him, Crusoe realized how dear the sacred phoenix was to Richard. But the valet did not deny that such a condition could be caused by the absence of the empress. He hoped that His Majesty would get along with someone from the delegation, but what happened did not leave a single chance. The guests returned to their countries unaware of what had really happened in the palace. According to the Count, in such a difficult time, the emperor needed words of support more than ever. Realizing that the empress's seat could no longer be vacant, the valet wanted to announce the start of the election. Without even looking in his direction, Richard decided that he didn't want to hear him anymore. However, Crusoe insisted that this would strengthen his position, and when things stabilized, Phoenix would certainly return. Suddenly, the emperor thought that now that he had lost the bird, it was more important to find his wife than to continue to take care of her. A little later, when Haniel heard from Scarlet about the election of a new empress, she was furious. Taken aback by such a reaction, the woman did not understand why she was angry. The heroine decided to clarify that since we are talking about the election of the empress, does it mean that Richard is looking for a wife? The girl was shocked that she was still there, but he wanted to marry someone else. Looking at her carefully, Scarlet suddenly realized that perhaps the heroine was already familiar with His Highness. When she learned that this was the case and that they knew each other very well, the woman did not understand when this could have happened. Where could they even meet if Richard traveled west only to hunt demons? Suddenly, the only reasonable and logical answer that could be in this situation pierced the head of the former empress. After all, it probably happened that the heroine went to fight demons, and in the end won the love of a handsome man. Now, Scarlet simply could not miss such a great opportunity, because they were destined to be together. She decided that the heroes may have been close, and, according to the girl, Richard was very kind and attentive to her. Hearing that such an Iceman as her son was kind to someone, the woman opened her mouth in surprise. He refused to meet with the applicants many times, considering them all extremely annoying. Now she realized that he was refusing to meet because he was only waiting for her, and Haniel was thinking about how to prevent the election. Completely delighted, Scarlett considered their love story very romantic. The man returns after leaving his beloved because of his high position. She misses him so much that she decides to leave the West and go in search of her man. The former empress was sure that such a thing deserved to be written down as a love affair. Since this had happened, she, as Richard's mother, had to help them meet. Seeing how Madame changed in behavior, the heroine decided that her deception had been discovered. However, the woman decided that the girl could only be with her son if she returned to the palace with her. Taking the heroine by the hand, Scarlett first wanted to hear directly from her if she wanted to marry His Majesty the Emperor. "I don't doubt for a second." Haniel gave her consent, considering Richard her only companion. Moreover, the one who saw a girl naked must certainly be responsible for this. Being in a silent shock at these words, the former empress decided that in this case, His Highness would indeed be held responsible. Haniel wanted to find Richard and give him many children, but she was depressed that he was now choosing another wife. She wanted a happy family, like other divine beings, and did not understand why love was so difficult for her. Now, as always, the heroine felt incredibly lonely. Taking her hands, Scarlett wanted Miss to stop worrying so much. After all, if she and the Emperor really had such deep feelings, then she wanted to help. Happy at this, Haniel immediately perked up and looked at her happily. Scarlett was going to do this through her brother, Duke Greta, and thus wanted to repay the girl for saving her. The woman decided to return to the palace as soon as possible to make the heroine a candidate for Empress. A little later, the election of the future Empress was announced throughout the country. 5 duchies used a special emblem with the coat of arms of the imperial family. The emperor was very worried about the disappearance of the sacred phoenix, and the valet felt a little sorry for him. Of course, Crusoe himself felt remorse for pushing him to get married, but he believed that it would only be for the good. Later, walking with the Count around the palace grounds, Chad wondered why His Majesty had ordered the search to be cancelled. Crusoe himself was not sure that he knew the reason, but the case of the disappearance of the bird turned out to be too mysterious. At first, they thought it was the work of high-ranking demons, but according to the wizards, there was no trace of them. At that time, they even suspected that there were enemies hiding among the Magi themselves, but this was almost impossible, because these people were far more loyal to His Majesty than anyone else. There were only 2 magical communities in the Empire, and the first were wizards who studied the magic of everyday life. The second were magical swordsmen fighting with magical power-ups. However, there was also one person who was called the Ultimate Swordmaster, named Richard. He had personally chosen the mages for his service, so there was no doubt about their decency. However, this only added to the questions. Then Chad suggested another option, which was one of the worst. The hero thought that this could be the work of the rebels, from whom nothing had been heard lately. Sighing sadly, the valet decided that he needed to conduct another thorough search of the palace to make sure there were no spies here. Chad and the knights strengthened the guards, however. His Majesty was thinking incomprehensibly. Obviously, the disappearance of the phoenix left him with a deep, emotional wound. But looking forward hopefully, Crusoe decided not to worry and just watch for a while. And now, above all, there was preparation for the long-awaited election of the Empress. In addition, the heads of the 5 ducal houses were also looking forward to this moment. They included the Greta family, whose symbol was a falcon, as well as the Dosman family, whose symbol was an owl. They also included the Peer family, symbolized by the eagle, and the West Porlington family, who had a dove. The last was the Modron family, whose coat of arms proudly adorned with the symbol of a swan. The valet knew from rumors that the West Porlington family had recently adopted a daughter. At the moment, there are candidates from each of the 5 duchies, not counting the Greta family. The Count was surprised that, in the Marshal's opinion, Duke Greta would not send anyone. However, he was still a guardian of principles, and since the previous Empress was the sister of Duke Greta, their participation was unlikely. Meanwhile, Calm, the head of Greta's family, having listened to his sister's plan, came into a stupor. Scarlett wanted him to nominate the girl she had brought from their family as a candidate for Empress. But the Duke believed that since the previous Empress already belonged to their family, it was not good to indulge the ambitions of power. Then the woman decided to be honest and clarified that this lady was already His Majesty's beloved. Hearing that the emperor had a lover, Kam was doubly taken aback. As it turned out, it was a chance meeting, and Scarlet happened to find out about their unhappy love. And can she, as a mother, just turn a blind eye to this, as if nothing had happened? Considering it a surprising coincidence, Cam remembered that his sister had always been compassionate. In his opinion, it was not worth trusting people so recklessly, and it sounded suspicious about His Majesty's beloved. However, Scarlet was convinced that the heroine was trustworthy, and even Iradion agreed. Shocked that the former emperor was also involved, the Duke decided to clarify if he had even managed to find out who she was. But the woman was ready to personally vouch for her, but Cam understood that if the imperial couple nominated someone, questions would arise. Therefore, Scarlet wanted her brother to pretend that the girl was a distant relative, a child from a rural family. The nobles would probably be against a foreigner of royal blood, so for now everything had to be hidden and then confessed to everything. Scarlet knew that as much as they wanted to stay in the capital and confirm her status, they needed to find something as soon as possible. She was sure that everyone would be understanding, but Cam believed that it would not do without criticism. And yet, the radiant smile of his sister intrigued him, and the Duke decided to meet the girl himself. At this time, Haniel was standing in another room and talking animatedly with Iradion. Seeing how Scarlet came out to them, accompanied by the Duke, the heroine joyfully greeted him. That evening, Haniel sat and stared in front of her, not understanding what it all meant. How could such a variety of such delicious food gather around this table right in front of her? There were dishes that she always wanted to try when Richard ate them. Feeling the Duke's gaze on her, she thought that she could really eat all this? Remembering how the Emperor wielded cutlery, she decided to try to do the same. Having tasted one piece, the heroine literally lit up with happiness, which made Scarlet very happy. Haniel couldn't help but be surprised to hear the woman say that she wanted to make her a candidate for Empress. Perhaps this was the best way, because if the heroine confidently enters the fight, then no one will doubt her. At the same time, she wanted to check if there was really a high-ranking demon lurking among the ministers. If there were indeed demons lurking in the palace, then she intended to get rid of them all. After a joint dinner, the Duke personally convinced the girl's royal affiliation after seeing her manners at the table. Realizing that she was indeed a noble person, Crumb ordered the dressmaker to come to him at dawn. It seems that Scarlet was sure that the heroine was engaged in trade and needed to dress her properly. The next morning, the famous Sweat arrived at the Duke's palace, joyfully greeting the former empress. But Scarlet immediately interrupted her, hoping that the dressmaker would keep quiet, because the girl did not know that she was the old empress. Madame was very surprised, thinking that there was really a single person in the empire who did not know the mistress by sight. This could mean that the heroine was from the village, but for the tailor it did not matter. Ever since she had decided to serve the former empress faithfully, Madame had been able to make anyone shine. The dressmaker's name was Narnia, and she was considered the best designer in the capital, and her self-confident smile gave Scarlet hope. Finally entering the room where the girl was, Narnia was ready for anything, wanting to make every effort for the sake of her mistress. However, looking at the heroine, the madam froze in place, her mouth wide open in surprise. In front of her stood a beautiful lady who looked like an angel, displaying the greatness of royalty with her entire appearance. A little confused, the dressmaker greeted the girl respectfully, deciding to make a dress for her. During her work, she met thousands of people, so she saw better than the rest. And looking at this lady, Narnia was sure that she would be the next empress. Before starting to sew the dress, the dressmaker wanted to know what color the heroine would choose. Narnia herself assumed that it would be pink, which would emphasize the beauty of the lady, or maybe a light blue one to emphasize the girl's innocence. But the ideal option would be the color of gossip magazines, simple and elegant white. However, when she saw which of the colors Haniel had pointed her finger at, the dressmaker was confused. But it was this color that the girl liked, which was extremely unexpected. Be that as it may, Narnia took it with enthusiasm, deciding once again to defend the title of the best designer of the empire. Meanwhile, upon learning that her father saw Rachel as a maid, her two brothers laughed, knowing her fighting character. Hearing this, the girl turned around and showed them her fist, after which they both fell silent. Looking at Duke Cam again, she was angry, but Noah and Noelle were absolutely right. Rachel believed that she was born to be a knight, not a maid, and wanted her father to stop ruining her dreams. After a while, the Duke invited Haniel to his study, gathering his children there. Entering and greeting everyone, the heroine introduced herself with the surname Fineso. Before that, Scarlet decided that they needed some kind of fictitious surname, and the first thing Haniel came up with was Fineso. She guessed that she had been mistaken for a princess from another country, but in any case, she couldn't reveal her identity. Rachel immediately ran up to her, happily greeting the heroine and introducing herself to her. Earlier, she learned from her father that she would only be considered a maid, but in fact, she would become an accompanying knight. In the imperial palace, the emperor will be able to knight her personally, so the duke will also give a letter of recommendation. Not wanting to miss such a great opportunity, the girl immediately invited Haniel to sit down on the sofa. Sitting more comfortably, the heroine drew attention to two guys who were sitting opposite and looking at her fascinated. Noticing that she was looking at them, the heroes shuddered, as if they had come out of a trance for a second. Wanting them all to call her by her first name, Haniel didn't understand why those two were looking at her. Maybe she had done something wrong. Duke Cam was surprised that the heroine had been sitting opposite for some time, but Noel and Noah did not even say hello. At the same time, blushing and covering their mouths with their hands, the young people introduced themselves as the Duke's sons. Haniel was very happy to meet them, looking at them with a joyful smile. At the same moment, one of the brothers jumped up from his seat, loudly slapping his hands on the table, which greatly puzzled the heroine, after which he decided to leave. The second young man was also discouraged, looking at his brother in surprise. Turning his gaze to Haniel, he suddenly jumped up and blushed and decided to leave as well. The heroine wanted to know from them what was the reason for leaving, but hearing her voice, the brothers immediately ran out of the room, slamming the door behind them. Rachel hoped that Haniel would not take this to heart, because in front of women in a dress, her brothers became fools. Also, as far as the girl knew, Haniel would go to the imperial palace as a candidate of the Greta family and decided to clarify this with her father. Cam agreed, deciding that while he wouldn't call it a struggle for the throne, someone would become empress anyway. The heroine was only happy, deciding that this was a great opportunity to become Richard's wife. Suddenly, Rachel jumped up from her seat, also deciding that Lady Fineso simply had to become an empress. She wanted to wipe the nose of those idiots of Chloe of the Duchy of Dosman and Rosalind and Maudrend and show them who the old man was. Haniel was taken aback when she heard Rosalind's name, and as it turned out, she thought she was the most beautiful. However, now, all the rivals had to tremble in fear before the invincible alliance of the fighting Rachel and the future empress. Meanwhile, Greta's brothers were standing outside the door, gasping for breath. Their hearts were still beating wildly and they didn't understand what kind of girl she was. For a human, she was too perfect, so the brothers came to the conclusion that she was a real angel. Remembering Haniel's sweet smile, Noah and Noel decided to go out and get some air. As they walked towards the exit of the palace, they thought that they must have looked very stupid when they escaped. In addition, both brothers came to the conclusion that the heroine would look great together with the emperor. Meanwhile, for the first time in hundreds of years, the election of a new empress began. The servants of the Sapphire Castle in which the Chosen One will live have been working without rest in recent days. However, in the midst of this chaos, there were not only servants, but also high-ranking officials. So, some ministers believed that it was necessary to leave everything as it was, because the information they had was several hundred years old. Others believed that it was necessary to take into account temporary circumstances and not necessarily follow outdated traditions. Thus, the problematic process of electing the empress, based on long-standing traditions, was also a serious issue. In addition, it was necessary to determine from which family the empress would be taken among the 5 grand duchies. In the meantime, he reported to His Highness on the meeting. Crusoe also wanted to share the result of the investigation about the candidates. However, the Emperor showed no interest in this, staring thoughtfully at the document. The valet was shocked, because against all odds, this time even Greta will introduce the girl. Hearing about this, Catherine unexpectedly showed interest, surprising the hero with this. Crusoe was sure that she would not have learned anything without him, such as the fact that Greta represented a distant relative from the village. In response, he heard from Catherine that most likely it was not the Duke's idea, which caused him to be stunned. But the maid simply believed that she knew the Duke better than the valet, which made him completely angry. Turning to them, Richard looked menacingly at the servants and demanded that they leave the office immediately. When they left, he got up and walked over to the cage, which had been empty for a long time. The silence now seemed so unfamiliar, and the thought of the phoenix's absence made her breath spiral. Richard used to like silence because walking alone was a habit. However, all this was in the past, and now he did not want to imagine life without her. A little later, looking thoughtfully out the window, Haniel remembered how recently a married couple of merchants left her. The heroine wanted them to stay longer, but for unknown reasons, Scarlet and Iradion urgently needed to leave for a while. Looking up at the starry sky, she thought that the two of them were surrounded by a lot of people. Despite the fact that Haniel even fell from heaven to earth, the loneliness did not go away. Looking at the harmonious family of the Duke, she felt like just a nobody. Deciding that perhaps there was no place for her anywhere else, the heroine missed Richard very much. Stretching out her hand to the moon, she was glad that she would be able to officially meet him tomorrow. Hoping that this melancholy would end tomorrow, Haniel suddenly saw a wing instead of an outstretched hand. The heroine was shocked that she managed to turn so suddenly. Realizing that now she could fly to Richard, the heroine felt an unprecedented thirst for life. Fluttering up and rushing towards the palace, she only wanted him to wait for her. At this time, the Emperor was already asleep in his bed, however, there was no peace in his dreams. Suddenly, in front of him, he saw the familiar silhouette of a girl with silver hair, who was looking somewhere in the distance. Stretching out her hand, she also stretched out her own in response, looking at the hero with a smile. Meanwhile, Haniel was thinking about how when you find a staff, you can't transform for a while. And now she wondered if this time had already passed, and whether she would be able to become a human. What if she remained a bird and could not participate in the election of the Empress? Haniel was afraid to even think about it, deciding that she would definitely become a human again. However, now it was more important that she missed Richard very much, and at that moment, she was already flying towards the palace. The window to the Emperor's room was open, and on the one hand, it was good, but what if there was a thief instead? Realizing that if she was caught, there would be turmoil, the heroine decided to hide her presence with divine power. Looking around the room, Haniel noticed that everything here remained as before. On Richard's desk, there was a large stack of documents, and the cage in which the heroine lived was wide open. And the most important thing was that the most beautiful face, according to Haniel right now, was sleeping in his bed. Pressing against his head, she missed the Emperor incredibly much. Suddenly, her gaze shifted to the side and she saw her favorite soft and comfortable pillow. From this, memories immediately flooded in, and the heroine realized that he also missed her. She really wanted to wake him up and apologize, because she wanted to return as soon as possible, but she couldn't. In addition, Haniel did not want to wake him up in the form of a bird, wanting to soon appear before him in human form. Now, the heroine is even more convinced that she will not miss this chance and will certainly become an empress. As she flew away, her heart seemed to be anchored to Richard, making each stroke reverberate with a resounding pain in her soul. Flying into the distance, hoping that the hero would wait for her a little longer, Haniel did not know that at that moment she was being closely watched. Without taking his eyes off her, Durahan followed the heroine with his eyes, and his thoughts remained a mystery. The next morning, the Emperor woke up refreshed as he began to stretch in bed. It was the first time he had felt so alive and didn't even remember the last time he had slept so soundly. The first thing he did was look at the pillow, and he found that Phoenix hadn't returned this time either. But suddenly, he saw a small white feather on it, remembering that yesterday there was nothing there. Taking it and holding it closer to examine, his gaze suddenly became moist. Calling loudly to Phoenix, he immediately rushed to her cage, filled with hope. However, it was empty inside, and Richard realized that it had flown in while he was sleeping. But it was not clear how he, being a swordmaster, did not feel her presence. But now there was no time to think about it, and the most important thing was that the Phoenix was at least alive. Meanwhile, during Noah and Noel's brotherly walk, Rachel suddenly appeared behind them. Since they weren't busy with anything right now, she wanted them to help her with one thing. As she tried to catch her breath, the brothers did not understand why there was such urgency. Deciding not to waste time on chatting, the girl grabbed the brothers by the arms and dragged them to the palace. Not understanding what was happening, the heroes suddenly found themselves in front of large doors. Rachel wanted the brothers to behave like His Imperial Majesty from now on. Surprised by such a request, the heroes thought that their sister was persuading them to commit treason. However, the girl just wanted to know that if they were emperors, what would they feel at the sight of Haniel? Opening the door in front of their noses, the brothers were presented with a heroine in a wonderful yellow dress with a flower on her belt. Haniel herself wanted to hear their opinion as soon as possible, looking happily at those who entered. Stopping at the entrance, Noah and Noel looked at the girl dumbfounded, speechless. Blushing sharply, they immediately turned away, which infuriated Rachel. Duke Cam, standing beside him, never thought that his sons would have such a hard time with a girl. Haniel was very hurt by such an attitude on their part, which was akin to mockery. Deciding that she would return when she changed her clothes, the heroine went to the fitting room with an offended look. However, Rachel and the Duke still wanted an answer from the brothers. What did they think? Barely moving their lips, they decided that Haniel looked like an angel, and their heart was about to stop. But this did not help their sister, who was sure that despite the purity, cuteness, and beauty of the lady, she was clearly missing something. The thought of the unlucky Rosalind of Modrand winning the election gave Rachel a headache. Suddenly, she came up with the idea of an outfit in which Haniel would not be exactly comparable to Rosalind. Ordering the next dress to be brought to her, the girl demanded that her father and brothers leave immediately. She decided that since she was responsible for Miss Haniel, then the heroine should not lose to anyone. Suddenly, Haniel came out of the fitting room, dressed in the dress she had just brought. Without noticing it, even the Duke stuck to this image, not taking his eyes off the heroine. Now he began to understand even more why Scarlet wanted to make her a candidate. In this maroon dress, she contained the grandeur of a noble madame, the grace of a swan, and the mysterious beauty of perfection. Completely delighted, Rachel grabbed Haniel's hands and began to dance happily. Delighted, the heroine decided that if the girl liked it, then she liked it too. Looking at Haniel with a smile, Cam was sure that he and His Majesty would complement each other well. She was a very bright girl in herself, but the future depended on her further actions. After that, leaving the room, the Duke approached his sons and silently put his hands on their shoulders. Grinning, he realized that they probably had a lot to discuss. For example, what they could not say, what they wanted to say, and what they did. After all, behaving like clumsy fools, young people disgraced the name of the Greta family. Grodno, but looking at them with a smile, Cam decided that it should not be like this. After that, he silently left, leaving his sons confused. A minute later, they unexpectedly walked back to the girls, and Rachel hoped to hear something useful from them, at least now. At first, they froze in place, and even from afar you could see a shiver in their body, which sent goosebumps. However, Haniel stared at them with a stony face, barely blinking. Blushing so much that they even lit up, they suddenly decided that she was incredibly beautiful. They were sorry that they hadn't said anything before, but the thing was that they were very shy. Of course, this may seem silly, but the brothers felt like fools in front of the girl in the dress and did not avoid her on purpose. After listening attentively, the heroine silently approached Noah and Noel, lowering her head. They wanted to apologize again, but when they heard from her that everything was fine, they were stunned. It was wrong to offend or avoid someone, but according to the goddess, even they could be saved if they repented. Therefore, she decided to forgive them too, shaking hands as a sign of reconciliation. Then, with a sinister smile, Haniel remembered that she had forgotten to mention one thing. Hiding her indignation under a smile, she decided that she wouldn't forgive them anymore if they continued to ignore them. Horrified by her terrifying aura, the brothers trembled again, but this time they felt fear. Strewn with riches, a vast territory, the abundance of resources of which contributed to enrichment. This was the land of the Duchy of Modrand, and they used any means and methods to achieve their goals. On the eve of the election of the Empress, the youngest daughter of this family, Rosalind, was calmly sitting in the room, combing her hair. Turning to Termin, the eldest son of the family, she wondered if she was beautiful enough for the Emperor to love her. Her brother thought it was natural, because there was no one in the country more beautiful than her, but was it necessary to answer this for the 5th time? However, as it turned out, the girl enjoyed it every time she heard about it. The younger brothers of the family, Tiago and Timothy, decided to give a more accurate description of her beauty. Tomorrow, her unfortunate friend Chloe Dosman will cry wildly because of her. Laughing, they thought that a freak like Chloe would become even uglier if she cried. Suddenly, Rosalind demanded to stop talking this nonsense, because how could she herself have such a worthless friend? Therefore, it was better to forget about Chloe because she was not worth their conversations. In addition, Rosalind hoped that if there was a candidate she did not like, the brothers would immediately get rid of her. That night, Haniel lay in her bed, trying to sleep to no avail. Tomorrow she will be in the imperial castle and only needs to endure the night, but time seems to have stopped altogether. Covering her face with her hands, she felt an incredible thirst to meet Richard. However, why cry? Because if you want to see someone, you just need to come to him. Deciding that right now she would definitely see him, the heroine turned into a bird and soared into the sky. After a while, the emperor went out onto the balcony, wanting to breathe fresh air and think before going to bed. Suddenly, seeing movement in the sky, he decided that it was a shooting star. But after a moment, Richard saw that it was Phoenix, which was rapidly heading towards him. Spreading his arms, he prepared to take the bird into his arms, being in blissful joy from the long-awaited meeting. But the bird flew at full speed into his stomach, causing the emperor to curl in agony and hit him with its strength. However, even so, he was infinitely glad that she had finally flown to him. Rising into the air, Haniel began to shout in bird language that she missed him very much. Before listening to all the chirping, the hero decided to show her a new, sturdy cage created by the main wizards. Hearing this news, the heroine instantly lost the joy of meeting and fear. It flew back like a bullet, confusing the emperor. It was definitely impossible for her to be caught now, because Haniel had worked so hard to see him. She was sad to have to leave Richard like this, because she missed him every day. The next morning, the carriage was served, and the Duke hoped that Haniel had time to prepare for departure. Opening the door and starting to majestically walk up the steps, the heroine was completely ready to go to the palace. Lately, the palace maids had no time to rest at all. After His Majesty announced the election of the Empress, they tirelessly prepared the Sapphire Palace for the arrival of the candidates. Also, the maids carefully checked the documents of each girl. When the preparations were completed, the candidates began to arrive at the Imperial Palace one by one. Rosalind was eager to see all her rivals, but to her surprise, Greta's family member had not yet arrived. In addition, all the other candidates were in identical white dresses. This fact was very depressing to Rosalind, who began to carefully examine all the applicants. They all wore such dresses because they had read in the newspaper that His Majesty loved simple women. But Rosalind did not understand. Do these fools really think that such dresses will somehow change them? She also knew that Chloe Dawsman would be there, but her appearance still shocked Lady Maudrand. As for the West Porlington candidate, she suddenly became the Duke's adopted daughter. Looking away, Rosalind also saw a girl from Duke Pierre's lineage, who was making her first appearance in social circles. However, it was clear from her face alone that she did not pose any threat. Rosalind was sure that with her appearance, all the aces were up her sleeve. And in general, she did not understand how it occurred to these ladies to become empresses with such and such faces. Annika West Porlington was tall and gave the impression of a girl with a strong character, which men did not particularly like. The same was true of Greffany Pierre, who seemed mischievous, which looked immature, pretentious, and superficial. Deeply relieved, Rosalind found it hard to stop laughing at the obvious result. However, there was one more thing missing, and she wondered when the representative of the Greta family would arrive. The maid couldn't say for sure, but she heard that it wasn't long to wait for her. The mansion of the Greta family was not far away, which is why Lady Maudrand decided that the heroine was late on purpose. Rosalind was amused by the fact that she seemed to be trying to stand out by being the last to arrive. In addition, there were rumors that Greta's family had been unlucky since the time of the late Empress. Taking a deep breath, the lady thought it strange to aim for the Empress, but at the same time be so late. As a time-savvy person, Rosalind was uncomfortable with this, and she also wanted to hear Chloe's opinion on the matter. Looking at her calmly, Lady Dawsman decided that she was starting to show who knows what again. There was still time before the appointed hour, so the girl understood that Rosalind was deliberately using this low, even for her technique. But what can you do if she has nothing but a beautiful face, at least like Chloe? Endurance. Suddenly, one of the servants came in and announced the arrival of a candidate from the Greta family. All the girls' eyes were fixed on the front door, and Rosalind was eager to see what she was like. Walking confidently and quickly, Rachel proudly walked into the room. All the girls were taken aback by such a sudden appearance of the heroine, staring at her in bewilderment. Lady Maudrand laughed, surprised at the appearance of such an unexpected candidate. Seeing her energetic attitude, Rosalind at first thought that she was just an escort. With a wink at her, Rachel admitted that it was absolutely true and that she had only come here as an escort. Haniel followed her, surprised that they were the last to arrive. Enraged by such a beautiful girl, and even in a red dress, Lady Maudrand felt threatened. Suddenly, the heroine felt someone's gaze on her and turned around to see a candidate from House West Porlington. Shocked, she froze in place, not understanding why this girl had come here. Haniel was grateful to Heliana for coming to this world and meeting the one who was destined for her. She really hoped for a happy future, but now she didn't understand what she was doing here. Rachel noticed that the heroine was staring at Lady West Porlington, which surprised the girl very much. As it turned out, among the 5 ducal families, the West Porlingtons were the only ones headed by a woman. They did not have children, but there were rumors that before the elections, they adopted a girl. Hearing that she had come here as an adopted daughter, Haniel looked at her rival fiercely again. The heroine was annoyed that this lady so brazenly pretended to be a noble lady and did not even blow into her mustache. Suddenly, Enika also looked at Haniel, after which the heroine thought that she wanted to figure it out on the spot. At the same moment, the girl smirked as if there was a pile of dung in the heroine's place. From such impudence, Haniel jumped abruptly from her seat, not understanding how it was possible to behave like this. But suddenly a man's voice was heard, demanding silence because this was the imperial palace. They planned to organize personal meetings of the girls with His Majesty, but due to a tight schedule, this turned out to be impossible. Seeing Count Crusoe on the threshold, Haniel was completely delighted, forgetting all perplexities. From tomorrow, each candidate would personally spend time with His Highness, but for now, the valet wanted to take them to their chambers. Proudly rising from their seats, the girls looked at the hero with hope and followed him. In turn, the heroine decided that she would also achieve Richard, no matter what. He did not have to endure for long, and very soon, they would live in paradise like a sweet couple. Walking last along the corridor, Haniel looked at the paintings of the palace with great interest. Initially, the beauty of the heroine greatly frightened the confident Rosalind. But now, seeing her turn her head to the sides, Lady Maudrand came to the conclusion that she was an ordinary country fool. Now if this continues, it will not affect the outcome in any way. The yard servants will also vote, and the beautiful Rosalind will certainly take first place everywhere. Thinking that it would be great to meet the Emperor as soon as possible, Lady Maudrand noticed that Crusoe stopped suddenly. Suddenly he looked around and began to stare intently in the direction of the candidates. Catching his gaze on her, Rosalind wondered if he had fallen in love with her too. Unable to find anything, he raised his hand to point in the direction in which Lady Maudrand stood. She thought that if he couldn't find the words to express his love for her, then he had better temper his ardor, since her goal was the Emperor. However, pointing directly behind Rosalind's back, he did not understand where the Greta family candidate was now. All the girls turned around in bewilderment and found that Lady Haniel had disappeared somewhere. Meanwhile, walking along the corridor, the heroine realized that although she did not notice it in the form of a bird, there were her portraits everywhere. Also, having fully experienced how huge the imperial palace was, she now understood Richard's loneliness even more. Remembering how he had asked in the bath to be called by his first name, Haniel was now running as fast as she could to her love. Wanting to brighten up his life as soon as possible, the heroine ran to the training ground, where the Emperor was now fighting and sparring. Happy to see him, Haniel was full of hope that he would accept her sincerity. She happily ran up to him and gave her a cold look. Richard was perplexed by such tactlessness. For a while, the heroine silently stared at the Emperor, confusing him. Suddenly, he noticed that on her bangs, the silver hair was partially dyed gold, just like Phoenix's. Realizing that this was a candidate and that she even managed to copy the image of his favorite bird, Richard was taken aback by such impudence. Seeing that he was not feeling well, Haniel decided to find out what had happened to Richard and touched him with her hand. Enraged, the Emperor struck her arm sharply, throwing it away from him. Besides, hadn't anyone told this lady that you couldn't call the Emperor by his first name? The heroine was horrified, not understanding whether such a rule really existed. And if he feels lonely because of this rule, why can't he just abolish it? Seeing her gaze, Richard thought that the way she looked at him was also against etiquette. But she didn't answer, admiring his beauty, which made the emperor think she wasn't even listening to him. A short time later, Crusoe personally apologized to His Majesty, considering the incident to be his oversight. However, Richard did not want to listen to this, believing that the valet had recruited only fools as candidates. From such words from his lips, Haniel opened her eyes in surprise and looked at the emperor. Crusoe did not understand how such a beauty could annoy him, because such cute faces are usually forgiven everything. Richard's patience was running out, and he ordered the lady to be taken to her chambers, which the earl did. He wanted to tactfully see the girl off, but she suddenly turned away abruptly, bringing him into a stupor. After that, she turned around again and looked at the emperor, concentrating all the accumulated indignation in her gaze. From this, Richard was completely taken aback, not understanding what had happened at all. Not understanding what she was doing, the valet hurried the candidate away until His Highness lost his temper at last. The emperor froze in place, shocked by such unheard-of audacity. Apparently, this indicated that all the candidates would be strange. The conversation turned out to be short, but she already seemed to him very strange, arrogant, and ill-mannered. Usually Richard is not so emotional, but at the sight of this girl, he immediately began to boil. Not understanding why she seemed so disgusting, he considered it to be the effect of strange people. In the room, Haniel was waiting for a neat table with a wonderful view of the garden. Also, there was the softest crib, however, despite everything. The heroine was in a terrible mood. Feeling tired from what she had experienced, she gracefully plopped down in bed. But suddenly, jumping sharply, she decided to figure out what exactly her mistake was. Haniel really didn't know about the existence of such rules of etiquette. She only remembered Richard's pitiful face in the bathroom, who was grieving that no one was calling him by name. If he himself thought that he was lonely because of this, then how to explain what had just happened? Also, the heroine was furious that he considered the candidates fools. She had always considered the emperor to be affectionate and kind, but was it really a mistake? Such words, heard from a loved one, did not allow him to sit quietly in one place. Transformed into a bird, she decided that now it was finally her way out. A little later, while walking down the street, Richard suddenly heard a familiar chirp. Fortunately, when he saw the phoenix, he was surprised, because is it really possible to accidentally meet this bird? But suddenly the bird approached sharply and slapped him in the face with its wing. The blow was such that there was even a stain on the emperor's cheek, which left him in a stupor. The servants who happened to see this were extremely shocked that someone had hit the emperor. Smiling shyly, Richard found this bird incredibly cute. Having taken revenge on him in this way, the heroine went to the palace, deciding to get down to business with all seriousness. Watching the servants from the chandelier, she wanted to know which of them was a demon. However, in this form, she did not feel the demonic energy, and in a human body, it was not so easy to move. Therefore, there was only one way out, to use the divine power, but being a bird, it would not be possible to do it fully. However, deciding to do it for Richard's sake, the heroine concentrated and paid attention to one person walking down the corridor. Suddenly he stopped and looked around, also looking at the chandelier. But seeing nothing there, he thought he had imagined it and went on. At the last moment, Haniel managed to hide, and considered it very dangerous. However, she was now sure that this particular person was a demon, as he was betrayed by energy. Deciding to fly and get a better look at his face, the heroine suddenly heard one of the maids turn to Count Crusoe. From the conversation, she learned that the valet was now on his way to Miss Haniel's to hand her a book on etiquette. In shock from what she heard, the heroine did not understand why it was needed right now. Thinking Crusoe was a fool, she instantly flew out the window, quickly heading to her room. Very quickly, the Count reached the right chambers and called out to Miss, wanting to notify her of his arrival so that she could open the door. At the same time, Haniel hurriedly buttoned her dress and put on her shoes. Knowing that the candidates were not allowed to wander around the palace without permission, the Count did not understand where she could be, if not at home. After all, it can't be that while he was gone something happened and she just ran away. Frightened by such thoughts, Crusoe decided that the best thing to do would be to call for help. At the same moment, the breathless heroine opened the doors, discouraging the valet with her condition. He wanted to give the reason for his visit, but Haniel already knew that it was a book on etiquette. Quickly thanking him, she snatched the book from the Count's hands and then hurried to close the door. However, at the last moment, she saw Rosalind and her brothers standing aside, looking at her suspiciously. Later, Crusoe reported to the Emperor that he had spoken to Haniel and that this would not happen again. But Richard didn't seem to hear him, looking out the window with a smile and thinking about something. The Count was very puzzled because not so long ago His Majesty was furious, and now he was glowing with joy. The next day, Haniel lay in her bed and enthusiastically studied the basics of etiquette. The name of the Emperor was really not worth pronouncing, because only his parents and official wife can do it. It turns out that Richard wanted his family to call him by his first name, as he lacked warmth and affection. The reason was that no one was on his side, and the heroine wondered if he had ever cried. However, Haniel was almost the only one who really understood his loneliness. She did not want to leave him and mentally stretched out her hand to Richard. The heroine wanted to go through all the hardships with him. After a while, Rachel ran to her, apologizing for her tardiness, the reason for which was the beautiful armor on which she was stuck. Once again surprised by her sincerity, Haniel hastened to calm the girl. Besides, she had recently had a request for Rachel, and she had just found out. Leaving the room and walking along the corridor, the girl wanted to know why Haniel needed to meet Annika. As it turned out, the heroine just wanted to talk to her a little face-to-face. However, when they first met, Rachel noticed the fierce gaze Haniel was looking at Lady Westporlington. Suddenly, they walked past a man who thought the Greta woman was extremely arrogant. Turning to the voice, the heroine saw a tall man with bright red hair. It was Duke Jaden Modrand, who didn't understand how she dared to look down on the fifth head of House Modrand. Distraught, Rachel began to greet him respectfully, but suddenly, Haniel stopped her with a gesture of her hand. Taken aback by such impudence, Jaden did not understand what she was doing here. However, according to etiquette, when communicating with a person who is higher than you in status, you should not greet first, so she stopped her. In addition, Duke Modrand was inferior to Haniel in status, which meant that his behavior was tactless. Of course, it was old-fashioned etiquette, which by and large was not observed, but the heroine was no longer going to give up. Clarifying that she had only voiced the rules of etiquette, Haniel and Rachel proudly walked on. Unable to object and enraged, Jaden thought she was an incredible. Tiago and Timothy were also surprised to see this, because they thought she was just a hillbilly. But Terman, who was walking behind them, decided that his brothers had better shut up right now. Passing by them and hurting each of them, the hero considered them complete who do nothing but use their surname. The heir himself believed that this woman had an extremely unpleasant look, and judging by what had happened, he thought that now there was a business for him. Meanwhile, Annika was discouraged by the arrival of guests and also pretended not to know the heroine. However, Haniel wasn't going to joke here and wanted to know why she had come here in the first place. Lady Westporlington was the most beautiful of the angels who tormented the heroine. According to her, she was here because of the Emperor, despite the fact that due to the curse, angels cannot have relationships with humans. Haniel had heard something about the curse before, but only in general terms. Seeing the lack of understanding in her eyes, Annika also remembered that the curse appeared because of the silver wings. The heroine did not understand what kind of curse it was and generally considered it meaningless. Looking at her with contempt, Annika was surprised that Haniel was still showing aggression. In addition, she did not understand why she had to explain anything to the heroine at all. Haniel remembered that due to rumors that her silver wings were the cause of the curse, everyone avoided her and pointed fingers. Because of this, she wondered if she was an angel who saved others. Why did they do this to her? What bad did the heroine do so that she had to endure even more loneliness, not understanding the reason? Meanwhile, seeing that the heroine was thinking about something, Annika was shocked that she was not listening to her. Haniel didn't know what to do, because of her memories of the sky, she felt depressed in front of the girl. And now, having lost all her confidence, she did not know if she would be able to stop the demons and win Richard's heart. At that moment she heard the voice of the goddess, who believed that because of the mission, Haniel should not miss her happiness. However, the heroine did not understand what would become of her mission if she did this. According to Heliana, everything will turn out as it should, and evil is already doomed to defeat. Therefore, if Haniel ever finds herself at a crossroads, she must first of all think about her own happiness. Gathering her strength, the heroine decided that if Annika did not want to talk, then she did not need to. After all, even with this curse, she was going to be truly happy. and the man she loves with all her heart will help the heroine in this. Not expecting such pressure from her, Enika looked at Haniel in bewilderment. She believed that the heroine was not suitable for the emperor because there had to be a real beauty with him. Enraged by these words, Haniel clenched her fist and filled it with divine power, breaking through the wall with it. Enika thought she was crazy, but according to the heroine, she did not understand the essence. After all, now the only angel with a mission was Haniel herself. The girl didn't understand what the fact that she wasn't an angel had to do with it. However, the difference was that the heroine could use divine power, and she could not. Enika was horrified, thinking that Haniel had decided to use her power against her right now. The heroine partly wanted this, but believed that all she had to do was defeat the demons, after which she took out her staff. This was her last warning, and the girl had better leave quietly right now, while there was an opportunity. As she left, Haniel regretted that she had been afraid of Yenika all this time. She also decided to admit that she had already kissed the man she wanted, and even saw him naked. Therefore, the heroine hoped that the girl would no longer dare to even look at her. Being in a stupor from what she heard, Enika could not believe that it was true. A few hours later, Haniel decided to praise herself for bravely confronting the offender from the past. To do this, she flew to the emperor again, and once on her pillow, the bird did not understand how long she would have to see this. Bending over her in one dressing gown, Richard unknowingly showed the heroine his muscles. Realizing that the bird was probably tired, the hero wanted it to rest a little in its new cage. However, at the same moment, she shot out the window, leaving him confused. As she flew along the forest at night, Haniel remembered that despite the election of the empress, the palace was very quiet. Until now, she didn't know that this was only the beginning of a real power struggle. From the next day onwards, His Majesty was to dine with the pretenders. Terrified by how quickly time flies, Richard wondered who would be the first of them. Glowing with joy, Crusoe hastened to report that Miss Haniel Fineso had been honored to be the first. This name did not say anything to the emperor, and he wanted to clarify who it was. Learning that this was the young lady he had met on the training ground, Richard's hand trembled. He was furious that a daring girl who dared to imitate Phoenix was also the first candidate. However, there was nothing to be done, and at the appointed time they sat at the same table together. Because of what had happened earlier, the emperor considered this girl to be a simple idiot. But to his surprise, her manners at the table turned out to be simply impeccable. On the other hand, the Duke would not have sent a candidate who did not know the basic rules of conduct. Even so, Richard couldn't forgive her for using a name meant for his wife. While he was thinking about how many things he disliked about Haniel, the heroine noticed his look on her. She didn't understand why Richard was constantly looking, because if he continued, she would definitely blush at his magnificence. However, she tried to stay calm and decided that it would be good to drink some juice. After taking a sip, the heroine was very surprised to find that the juice was grape. She decided to find out if he was fit for His Majesty, since he did not drink grape juice. Confused by such a statement, Richard did not understand how she knew this. Only his closest people could know that he did not drink grape juice. Realizing what a mistake she had made, Haniel now didn't know what to do in this situation. She herself learned this from him, lying together on the bed after a shower, but you can't mention such a thing now. Unable to think of anything better, she pretended to be able to instantly recognize a person who didn't like grape juice by his eyes. After these words, the emperor looked at her as if she were crazy, and a vein began to pulse on his temple. Finding this excuse made up on the fly absolutely ridiculous, he wanted to know what she was trying to do. But suddenly, the heroine got up from the table and quickly pushed a chair behind her, after which she hurried to the exit. Richard was completely taken aback, because he even managed to finish nothing, and she was already leaving. Haniel decided that since the mealtime had already come to an end, she had to leave. However, the emperor wanted to get an answer to his question, but instead, he heard only a loud goodbye. Today, everything went awry again, and wanting to earn herself a few points, the heroine instead talked some nonsense. Suddenly, she saw on the ground the ribbon that Rachel had put on that morning as she left the palace. In addition, the grass around seemed to be crumpled, as if someone was being dragged here. Afraid that something might happen to the girl, Haniel rushed to find her. Suddenly, she heard the familiar voice of a woman who didn't understand what Miss Rachel was thinking. Opposite the girl stood Rosalind and Chloe, as well as their companions, who looked at her mockingly. Looking at Rachel's soiled dress, Lady Modron thought that the Duke must have been very disappointed. After all, although she wanted to become a knight, she has neither special skills nor outstanding beauty, and she does not know how to present herself at all. Her family had tried their best to dress up that dirty, rustic mouse smelling of sweat, and now she had ruined her dress as well. Rachel then clarified that it was because these ladies had pushed her and forcibly dragged her here. Hearing such an address addressed to her, Rosalind was shocked, because how could this girl address them like that? After all, even the maids who served her came from families higher than Rachel's clan in status. Suddenly, Lady Modron remembered that the girl had always loved to train while sweating, and since she liked it so much, Rosalind wanted to help her become even more disgusting. At the same moment, the two companions surrounded Rachel on her sides, grabbing her hands. Not understanding what they were up to, Haniel finally decided to stop them. But the next second, Rachel was flying straight into the nearby fountain, to the laughter of the other ladies. The heroine immediately rushed to her, afraid that the girl might drown. Fortunately, the water was not deep, and Haniel hurried to help her out, and decided that now everything would get better since she was here. Rachel thought that today, as always, Miss had run to her when she was being offended, confidently believing that everything would be fine. The heroine looked like an angel, but before she knew it, tears welled up in Rachel's eyes. Hugging her, Haniel did not understand how it was possible to offend someone as pure and kind as her escort. One of the few things that the heroine could not tolerate was the bullying of her friends. Like an angel, she could not let this go unpunished and decided to take revenge. Hearing about revenge, the candidate's companions trembled with horror, looking at her with fear. Haniel decided that trying to harm others, you need to understand that you can get hurt yourself. Deciding to return everything to them in full, the heroine grabbed her companions by the hands, bringing them into a stupor. In a second, both girls were immersed in the fountain, disgusted looking at their wet dresses. As she approached Rosalind and Chloe, Haniel thought that they should have submerged in the water as well. At the same moment, she grabbed their hands, causing both girls to be horrified. Enraged, Rosalind ordered the nearby guards to protect them immediately. They remembered Lady Modron's words that dirty knights like Rachel had no place in the palace. So now, pretending not to see anything, they went to patrol another place. Chloe was horrified, and Rosalind desperately called them back, not understanding what was happening. However, after a second, all four girls were sitting together in the fountain. Not understanding why the guards had ignored her, Rosalind decided that they could not get away with it. Smiling at her, Haniel was glad to keep her promise to repay them in kind, and had Lady Modron forgotten that? She looked down on others so contemptuously, but it seems that her memory is not so good. The heroine thought that she would also be happy to play with them in the water, but unfortunately she fell ill. At the same time, this was the first time that Haniel directly punished a person and hoped that she did not go too far. Looking at them from afar, the departed knights mockingly decided that this was now how the civilian nobility amused themselves in the water. Furious at her position, Rosalind stared furiously at Haniel, dreaming of ripping her head off. Suddenly, the voice of a man came from who didn't understand what they were all doing here. The heroine recognized him because it turned out to be the Knight Marshal Chad, who always maintained a good aura next to Richard. However, today, for unknown reasons, the hero was in an extremely evil mood. Prior to this, the Emperor had personally ordered him to investigate the Greta candidate, starting from the moment she arrived in the duchy. The cause was a suspicious incident that occurred during the joint meal of His Highness and Miss Haniel. Rosalind and the others immediately hid behind the hero's back, pretending to be innocent victims. In response to his question, the heroine remembered the words of the girls that they loved to play on the water, so they decided to play. At this time, Chad remembered that when he accidentally met her in the palace, the first impression was not bad. Her brightly shining silvery hair and graceful movements conquered the soldier. Then he thought about how such a beautiful person could even exist in reality. It wasn't until he saw this scene where she hurts the other girls. Only one girl was fine, while the others were shaking with fear, and only Haniel stood and scolded the others. It was hard to imagine that she could bully others with such a fragile physique that it was even more suspicious. Looking at his frowning face, the heroine thought that perhaps Chad was also in cahoots with the others. The girls began to throw mud at her in turn, accusing her of bullying them. Rachel was shocked by such impudence, but once again, the heroine prevented her from trying to intervene. Glancing menacingly at Haniel, Chad decided that it was wrong to mock others like that in the palace, even if she was a candidate for Empress. Looking back intently, the heroine did not understand how this guy could communicate with them, being Richard's knight. At this moment, Rosalind's frightened companion decided that Haniel had a very scary expression on her face. However, to the hero himself, even now, it still seemed cute and angelic. At the same moment, he suddenly found himself in the fountain, not understanding what had just happened. Realizing that he had been knocked over there by the heroine, Chad was shocked. Being an elite knight, he did not even notice her movements. Looking at Haniel in surprise, he decided that this was the first time such a thing had happened to him.